Chapter 1831. Countless cultivators looked in the direction of the divine palace in shock. In the sky above the divine palace, Singang, the black-armored commander of Daqin, entered the fray and became enemies with Zhanlo. The relationship between the two sides that had lasted for hundreds of years was suddenly broken, and the situation was out of control. This scene was beyond the imagination of all the imperial lords. Daqin and the war god temple broke off because of one person. Lichuji was Dendi, who was still alive. However, it made sense. Dendi was the first emperor of Daqin. If he died at the hands of the war god temple, it was inevitable that the first empire of the East continent would be tainted. Singang's name would also be tarnished forever. The cultivators of various forces trembled madly. It was indeed difficult for them to adapt to the current situation. Muyue's return to the East continent after being missing for 600 years was enough to shock the Five Realms. Who would have thought that Dendi was still alive and had come to save Muyue? At this moment, Singang gave an order. His cultivation erupted, and the terrifying fist aura shattered the space, trying to stop Zhanlo. Muyue was no longer important. The key was to bring Denda back to the Qin Imperial Palace alive. The surging fist aura radiated the world, filled with the true will of the Great Path. Singang knew Zhanlo's strength very well, so he naturally didn't dare to hold back. Zhanlo held the glaring sword of the war god, and the majestic true will of the emperor surged. Singang's fist aura blasted out, and his 9 layers of emperor's halos bloomed, bursting with astonishing emperor's light, shattering the fist aura in one blow. Then he raised his hand to the sky, and the 9 golden crows cried in unison. Terrible flames poured down, turning into a river of lava that drowned Singang. Mere emperor's slave. Singang roared and ignored the falling flames of the golden crow. He reached out and grabbed the air, and a dazzling imperial staff appeared in his hand. He slashed forward, and the true will of the Great Path roared. A heavy roar of the staff sounded in the air as it was cut in half. The flames of the golden crow were also reduced to nothingness under his aura. The terrifying shadow of the staff landed in front of the battle tower. The 2 emperors of true self fought, and the power of the will of the Great Path could destroy the world. Singang was not at all on the same level as the one who attacked Zhanlo before. He was a super cultivator who could break the emperor's will of the emperor's will. Zhan Lu was not surprised at all. His calm demeanor was suffocating. The shadow of the Great Path's staff slashed down and cut open his imperial body, but it was just a shadow. In the next moment, Zhan Lu, who had disappeared, reappeared behind Singang. The divine light of the sword penetrated Singang's back, sending chills down his spine. Chi! Sparks flew from the pitch-black armor, and the sword peak filled with the true will of the Great Path cut open the imperial armor, leaving a shallow wound on Singang's back. Singang's reaction was also extremely fast. Almost as soon as the sword edge cut through his skin, he had already rushed forward to avoid worsening his injury. He turned around and swung his staff. The sky was filled with staff shadows that blocked out the sun and blocked out everything. The profound meaning of this staff strike was the god-step step of the severing battle tower. Zhanlo raised his head slightly and looked at the staff shadows falling from the sky. A cold smile appeared on his face under the helmet, as if he was mocking. A dazzling light wheel appeared behind him. His will of the emperor began to climb crazily in the light wheel. Letting go of the divine sword in his hand, Zhan Lu's palms changed, forming a sword technique. His emperor's true will resonated with the divine sword, erupting with tens of thousands of terrible currents of swordsmanship. The incomparably terrible sword Qi came out and swallowed all the staff shadows in the sky. Zhan Lu took a step forward and shook the sword in his hand. Above the divine sword, a flash of sword Qi shot out so fast that no one could react in time. With a whoosh, it pierced through Singang's shoulder, and the solid shoulder armor fell off from Singang's shoulder. "You!" Sengang's face twisted slightly, and the terrible light of rules appeared in the broken flesh of his shoulder. Denda's swordsmanship was displayed in front of Qin Hao. How ironic. Your realm is the same as mine, but your strength is not as good as mine. Get out of here, Zhanlo said. He had been trained by Dendi and the Sunset Warlord since he was a child. Sengang was not his opponent at all. It is my honor to fight with Commander Liu. Today, I will die in your hands, but I must try to take Dendi away. Sengang glanced at Qin Hao. He entered the Daqin army and climbed up step by step from a low-level soldier. Although his talent was extraordinary, his weakness was the level of his cultivation method. He knew that he could not beat Zhanlo, who had received the true teachings of the two great masters. But today, he could not retreat. Taking a deep breath, Sengang calmed down. The space was a little quiet at this moment. The light of the staff life spirit in his hand was getting brighter and brighter. Behind him, the will of the great path flowed. It seemed to be brewing a terrible killing move. Zhanlo stared at his opponent. He was going to use his trump card, but what was the use? 9 strokes of the sky. Suddenly, Sengang let out a violent roar, as if a ferocious beast had been awakened. He stood firmly in the air, becoming one with the heavens and earth. An unparalleled aura erupted from his body, and a tiny figure flew out from the light wheel behind him, overlapping with his body. His entire body was covered in a layer of noble platinum, as if his sovereign spirit had been sublimated, and he had become a god that ruled over all things. Immediately, Sengang moved. He gathered the endless momentum of heaven and earth and smashed the staff in his hand toward Zhanlo. The sky roared and the terrible light blocked everyone's sight. Between heaven and earth, there was only the sky-shaking staff. Stealing other people's things is not a good thing after all. Zhanlo sneered coldly. This was the 9 strokes of the sky. Sengang secretly learned it when he was the deputy general of Zhan Lang. Although he had changed it himself, he still could not get rid of the shadow of the 9 heaven consecutive strikes. It seemed that each staff was stronger than the last, but it was not the essence. Zhanlo thought so in his heart, but his expression was very solemn. After all, the 9 heaven consecutive strikes had been taught by Dendi. Its level was very high and its power was infinite. He did not dare to underestimate Sengang's next attack. What's more, the other party was still fighting with his life. The true will of the great path snaked around his body. Zhanlo changed from holding the sword with one hand to 2. He swung his sword at the shadow of the staff. With a clang, an incomparably fierce force was transmitted. The palm holding the sword was numb, and the blood in his body was boiling. After Sengang's attack, his momentum did not diminish. The momentum of heaven and earth on his body was strong. When he swung the staff again, the momentum of the first staff was integrated into it, turning into the second staff. It swept across the waist, trying to flatten everything. Bang! Another blow. Zhanlo's body shook. Next, the third staff, the fourth staff. The power of Sengang's every swing increased exponentially. When he swung the 7th staff, Zhanlo had been knocked back dozens of feet from his original position. Faintly, his arms were trembling. The 8th staff. Sengang roared out, like a divine tiger descending into the world. The staff of his life spirit rolled up a series of afterimages. It was as if 7 staff shadows fell into the 8th attack. An incomparably violent force bombarded. Zhanlo's waist sank and the light wheel of the great path erupted with endless imperial light. He gritted his teeth and braced himself. Boom! This staff directly smashed Zhanlo hundreds of feet away. On the way back, blood overflowed from under his cold helmet. His body trembled, and his limbs and bones seemed to have been shattered by this staff. The skin between his thumb and index finger of both hands holding the sword cracked. Chapter 1832. Due to unknown reasons, the search dog was suddenly unable to search for this site today. Please remember this site's domain name and find your way home. The 9 sky-shaking staffs gathered the momentum of heaven and earth, and each staff was stronger than the last. Sengang's every strike increased the power of the staff technique. When the 8th strike fell, it brought great pressure to Zhan Lu. Zhan Lu was sent flying hundreds of feet away. His internal organs were almost dislocated, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The 9th strike. Sengang's roar was extremely violent. He rose into the air and stood on a commanding height. He looked down at Zhan Lu from above. The light wheel of the great path behind him expanded, bursting with endless light of true will, radiating the boundless space. At this moment, a huge phantom emerged from Sengang's body and turned into his appearance. He stood there like a god, holding a giant mountain-like staff in his hand. He smashed out with the staff, and the world collapsed and shattered. Terrifying fragments intertwined together, like dense and sharp fragments, all wrapped around the staff as he struck out with the last crazy blow toward the battle tower. Zhan Lu felt the pressure of the staff coming down, and his spiritual soul trembled. Although Sengang's imperial law was not as good as his, he was still a true self-great emperor. When the will of the great path was fully released, the power was indeed terrifying. However, if he wanted to defeat him with this strike, he was daydreaming. "You've exhausted all your tricks," Zhan Lu said. He stroked the sword of Zhan Lu. The light wheel of the great path flowed, and a tiny figure flew out and entered the sword. The man and the sword became one, and the true will merged. Suddenly, the divine sword was covered with a layer of dazzling true will. It seemed to have turned into a real sword of the gods, and the might of the great path roared in the 9th heaven. Zhan Lu held the sword high, and the momentum and the great path merged. He was about to strike with this sword to end the battle with Sengang. Suddenly, a beam of nirvana beam shot down from the distance, covering Zhan Lu's body. An incomparably huge eye of destruction appeared in front of him out of thin air, staring into his eyes. Zhan Lu's body suddenly trembled, and his spiritual soul was attacked by the will of the Way. A boundless dark world appeared in his mind, filled with the air of death, and white bones were everywhere. Among the millions of bones, a huge throne stood, and a burly figure sat on it. Zhan Lu stared at the figure on the throne. A terrifying demonic might press down on him, causing his body and mind to tremble. A pair of terrifying eyes stared at him. In particular, there was a slit in the center of the other party's forehead, emitting terrifying demonic light. At this moment, Zhan Lu felt that his soul no longer belonged to him. It was about to be taken away by the demonic light. A technique. Zhan Lu soon realized that Qingji Han's Eye of Nirvana meant that Princess Daqin's personal ability couldn't be compared with his, so she couldn't cause any substantial harm to him. Therefore, she used the Eye of Nirvana to interfere with him. Boom! Zhan Lu's Emperor True Soul burst out, breaking through the illusory demonic domain in one fell swoop. He broke free from the demonic might and returned to the real world. But at this moment, a terrifying roar came from above his head. A giant staff carrying a huge shadow smashed down heavily. Bang! There was a terrible sound of a heavy blow in the sky, and the surging power radiated down. The mountains of the Valley of the Gods collapsed. The cultivators flew into the sky one after another to avoid being buried by the chaotic mountains. They were all terrified as they watched Sengang's staff strike Zhan Lu's head. Under the influence of Qingji Han's Eye of Nirvana, Zhan Lu quickly came to his senses, but he couldn't resist Sengang in time. At their level, the slightest difference could lead to a great loss. They endured this incomparably crazy staff strike head-on. Space was still at this moment. The ice-cold helmet twisted and fell off in 2 halves, revealing a fair and handsome face. Zhan Lu held his sword, and his body trembled violently. His eyes quickly lost focus, and blood flowed down his forehead from his messy hair, dyeing his entire face red. The cultivators of the 4 regions trembled violently. It was as if this staff had smashed their hearts and destroyed their spiritual souls. Did Sun Gang kill Jean Lu? Ah! A shout erupted from the sky. Jean Lu looked up to the sky and roared. Endless fighting spirits swept out from his body, turning into a storm of the great path that swept everything. His eyes shrank and condensed into a terrifying sharpness. Boom! The storm swept past, causing the void to distort. Qingji Han couldn't dodge in time and was sent flying by the storm. The Emperor's light around her dissipated. She didn't even have time to spit out blood before she fainted. Princess! Countless cultivators of Daqin tried to save her, but they were all killed by the storm of fighting spirit and torn to pieces. Princess! Sun Gang was shocked. He looked at Jean Lu in horror. Was he still okay? It wasn't the true self, it was definitely not the true self. No matter how strong the true self Great Emperor was, he couldn't continue to stand after 9 strike. Jean Lu didn't weaken but became stronger instead. His fighting spirit kept rising, and his aura reached a level that made Sun Gang tremble. Sun Gang! Jean Lu roared. His face was stained with blood, and his eyes were extremely sharp. He took a step forward, and the fighting spirit of the Great Path pressed down. The space was sealed by his will. Sun Gang's heart trembled violently. The long staff in his hand blasted out directly, stirring up the brilliant light of true will. Immediately, a sword aura cut through the sky and shattered the staff's shadow. The sword aura cut through Sun Gang's life spirit all the way and slashed in front of him. Sun Gang felt an incomparably strong sense of impending death. He pushed his palms forward and quickly closed them together, firmly clamping down on the sword light that was slashing down. The terrifying fighting spirit swept out, and the armor on his arms shattered crazily. His flesh and blood seemed to be cut apart, and his 2 hands revealed eerie white bones. At this moment, he let out an unbearable cry. Bang! War Tower punched out, slamming into Sun Gang's abdomen. The terrifying laws completely shattered the Emperor-grade battle armor bestowed by Empress Ling Xian. The powerful battle intent penetrated Sun Gang's internal organs. He could no longer withstand it. He prostrated himself on the ground and collapsed in front of War Tower. The divine sword in Jean Lu's hand was dazzling, but he didn't kill Sun Gang. He just stared at him coldly. Then he stretched out a foot and stepped on Sun Gang's face. He laughed and said, "You can't do it." Sun Gang exuded a sad aura, and his eyes were extremely bleak. He looked sideways at Jean Lu and saw that his wheel of true will had disappeared, and so had the 9 layers of Emperor's rings. His will of the Emperor was natural and perfect, as if it flowed with the heavenly path. Flawless. Chapter 1833. Rumble. At Qin Hao's side, 3 sovereign lord auras descended. Tai Hui, Sanmu, and Zhu Mian obeyed Sun Gang's orders and wanted to bring Denda back to the Qin Imperial Palace in Daqin. They could not let him be controlled by the War God Temple. At this moment, 2 Emperor Lords and a pinnacle of the Tao attacked at the same time. The pressure in the void was extremely strong. Tai Hui and Sanmu were the best of the Emperor Lords in the East Continent. The 2 of them worked together to kill the Emperor of the Great Zhou Empire in the Dark Abyss. The process was extremely easy. Zhu Mian's cultivation was stronger. He was once on the same level as Meng Xiang. As Meng Xiang broke through the Emperor's path of truth, Zhu Mian received the inheritance of the statue Divine Guards. He was also half a step into the true self. He had surpassed the pinnacle of the Tao. It was not an exaggeration to call him a false true self. The 3 of them attacked at the same time. Other than Sun Gang and Sun Gang, no one else could deal with them at the same time. Even Meng Xiang and Jin Chen would have to avoid them. Qin Hao got up and carried Mu Yue on his back again. He stood in front of the temple and looked at the 3 of them. Vivian's soul was very weak. It was obvious that she had been attacked by a powerful spiritual spell. Judging from her injuries, Sanmu must have attacked. Sun Gang ordered them to take Qin Hao away. He did not think it was out of good intentions. The great void cauldron was with him. Once he returned to the Qin imperial palace, he would not be able to control himself. How could Qingji Han let him go and not covet the great void cauldron? What happened in the buried god temple was too sudden. It was surrounded by the grandmasters of the 5 realms. Although he was not sure whether Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian were involved, their actions were too cold-blooded and heartless. They drove away the 4 divine generals of Zhan Lang and destroyed the Taiji palace that Denda supported. Even if Vivian attacked them, it was not a direct attack. She must have been arguing with them before she attacked. Vivi was not an unreasonable person. Regardless of whether Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian had conspired with the 5 realms patriarch, at least they were still alive and well after the incident. They had even wiped out all of Qin Hao's trusted aides, causing Denda's name to become a taboo in the East Continent. They had also accused Zhan Lang and the others of treason, twisting right and wrong. Just based on this point alone, Qin Hao could not follow Zhu Mian and the others back to the Qin imperial palace. If he did, the consequences would be unpredictable. His silver hair fluttered gently. The wounds on his body healed quickly after being washed by the tranquil water. However, the war tower had shattered his dragonized body and damaged his life spirit. He could no longer use the power of the dragon soul again. At this moment, a demonic imprint on Qin Hao's shoulder emitted a faint glow. In an instant, the demonic imprint on Qin Hao's shoulder glowed brightly. Incomparably turbulent deathly gray gas gushed out and turned into evil spirits that filled the sky. Terrifying evil aura spread out in all directions. Streams of qi entangled Vivian, who was on his back, and bound her to him. Qin Hao's pitch-black pupils disappeared. His eyeballs were completely occupied by the whites of his eyes. The corner of his mouth cracked open, and he revealed a horrifying smile to the 3 people in the air. His aura was incomparably dangerous. "Take him down," Zhu Mian said directly. When Tai Hui and Samu saw Qin Hao's current appearance, their souls trembled. Then, they nodded heavily. Rules and Dao wills blasted forward at the same time. In the Nether Abyss demonic zone, Qin Hao was covered in evil aura after the battle with Meng Xiang. This evil power was extremely shocking. Since he used this power again, it was obvious that he was unwilling to leave with them. In that case, they would directly suppress him and take him back. Swoosh! A divine spear appeared in Taihui's hand. Endless Emperor's Dao rules surrounded it. It was extremely sharp. He raised his hand and threw it out, aiming at Qin Hao. Qin Hao looked up at the light of the divine spear flying toward him. This life spirit rule was very special. It was very similar to Wux's sword will. It was indestructible and had extremely terrifying penetrating power. Qin Hao raised his arm and pointed forward. Evil aura rolled around him. A gray sword qi flew out. It shuttled through the void and collided with the divine spear. There was a strong sound wave. The divine spear melted into the gray sword qi. He is very strong. He is not inferior to Meng Xiang. Don't hold back, Tai Hui shouted. As soon as they exchanged blows, he felt a great pressure from the opposite side. The 9 layers of Emperor's rings bloomed under his feet. The surging Emperor's Dao light spread and flowed around Tai Hui's body. He stretched out his arms. The space around him exploded with beams of dazzling light. They gathered into 8 divine spears of rules. They hung upside down and fell on Qin Hao's head at the same time. "Dende, don't make things difficult for us," Zhu Mian roared. His palm smashed toward the sky. Endless bloodlines spewed out from his palm. They were densely packed and twisted, weaving into a spider web that covered the sky. The Emperor's will moved and fell from the sky. It covered Qin Hao's body first, wanting to trap him. Those who offend their superiors should be killed. A cold, emotionless voice came from Qin Hao's throat. As the emperor of a country, Zhu Mian and the other 2 were all his subordinate. Whether it was right or wrong, they had attacked their master. Their actions were already a crime. Qin Hao waved his hand. With the 10 Ming demonic path precepts binding him, he could control the power of the evil fetus as he wished. In essence, the evil power he was currently exerting was comparable to the destructive power of the dragon form. But there were also differences between the two. One was hard and the other was ease. Other than affecting one's temperament, the indestructible precepts of the dragon form were not complete. However, the evil fetus was complete. Unless the other party had an absolute will like Jeanlot to crush him, they would not be able to break through his evil spirit technique. Buzz. A monstrous evil aura filled the air. Evil spirits without limbs and only heads appeared in the evil aura. They let out ear-piercing howls. Grief, anger, despair, craziness, and all kinds of negative emotions had reached the extreme. The howls of the evil spirits intertwined chaotically, as if they could tear apart the ears of the emperors of the 4 regions and demand everything from the world. Wailing heads flew out one after another, dragging out long strands of evil aura. They soared up and directly dispersed the spider web that covered the area. The precepts of Zhu Mian's half-step true self were completely devoured. It was also in Zhu Mian's incomparably horrified screams that the evil spirits drowned Tai Hui's 8 divine spears. These seemingly invincible divine spears were so insignificant and vulnerable under the devouring of the evil spirits. Whoosh! A slit opened on San Mu's forehead, and an incomparably solemn divine light shone down, wanting to purify the evil spirits that filled the sky. Qin Hao's 2 eyes turned white, and evil thoughts penetrated the void and directly invaded the divine eye on San Mu's forehead. A scream came from the void. San Mu's 2 hands covered his eyes, and blood flowed out from the center of his divine eye like a fountain. His palms desperately clawed at the divine eye, wanting to dig out this natal soul eye. It seemed that at this moment, the eyes that made him look down on the emperors of the 5 regions of the East Continent had become an ominous thing that cursed him, a burden, and a filthy thing that could kill him. San Mu screamed crazily, and his 10 fingers turned into sharp claws that sank deep into the flesh of his forehead. In front of Zhu Mian and Tai Hui, he dug out a bloody hole. Unfortunately, it was too late. The fastest evil spirit was dragging a long gray gas behind it. It went from Qin Hao's position and bit on the 3-eyed head. The evil spirit's mouth tore open and swallowed the 3-eyed head. At this moment, in the collapsed valley, the monarch masters finally saw clearly that it was Lupi's head. San Mu! Tai Hui shouted as he watched the 3 eyes being devoured by Lupi's evil spirit. The scene was extremely tragic. At this moment, a powerful external force came and slammed into his body. He felt as if he had been hit by something, and his body flew backward involuntarily. In the next moment, a dense group of evil spirits swept over and spread out from Tai Hui's position, tearing San Mu's body apart on the spot. "Let's go." Zhu Mian grabbed Tai Hui tightly with one hand and did not dare to look back. At this moment, his left arm was severed from the shoulder, and blood flowed out crazily. It turned into a turbulent emperor light and quickly escaped from this area. Even someone as strong as a half-step true self could not block this extreme evil spirit force. If he did not sever his arm, Zhu Mian might have been swallowed whole by the evil spirit like San Mu. It was too terrifying. Rules and Dao intents were completely ineffective. They were like fish in front of Qin Hao, waiting to be slaughtered. In the collapsed God Burial Valley, it was a mess. Above countless huge rocks, the strong cultivators of the 4 regions looked at the 2 battle groups with fear. Zhan Lu defeated Tsingang and stepped on Tsingang's face. With the other hand, he pinched the white neck of Daqin's princess, Qing Jihan. His 5 fingers clenched so hard that blood flowed out. Above the temple, Qin Hao fought 1 against 3. In an instant, Zhu Mian's arm was severed and Tai Hui fled. San Mu was swallowed by the monster until not even his bones were left. Terrifying. Too terrifying. Whether it was Zhan Lu's power or Qin Hao's extreme evil Dao intent, The strong cultivators of the four regions would never forget this scene. Even the weak disciples of the various forces would be branded with a shadow in their hearts. Chapter 1834. The space became extremely quiet. Qin Hao and Zhanlo defeated their opponents almost at the same time, and their eyes met across the air. Zhanlo saw Qin Hao's evil aura soaring to the sky and countless ugly evil spirits swaying behind him. He couldn't help but frown. Qin Hao's change made him feel uncomfortable and surprised. The dandy in his impression was out of place at this moment. But soon, Zhanlo returned to normal. His expression was still cold, and his calm aura was frightening. He kicked Sun Gang away and kicked at the black-armored soldiers of Daqin who were hiding in the distance. Then he threw Qingji Han there. From the beginning to the end, he didn't look at the princess of Daqin. In the eyes of others, Qingji Han was unattainable, but in his eyes she was just a useless waste. Princess! Chief Commander! Countless black-armored soldiers came forward to catch the two. Sun Gang seemed to have no bones in his body, as if he had been turned into a cripple by Zhanlo's rules of fighting intent. Except for being unable to move, he was still conscious, and his eyes were bleak. He glanced at Tai Hui and Zhu Mian, who had returned to the formation. 3 people went and 2 people came back. Tai Hui's face was pale, and he was still in shock. Zhu Mian had lost an arm, and San Mu had no bones left. At this moment, Sun Gang's bleak eyes revealed endless sadness. He shook his head and said, "Forget it." At this point, Daqin, the first empire of the East Continent, had completely lost the qualification to establish a foothold in the ruins. Like other third-rate forces, they could only watch from afar and had no ability to influence what happened next. How ironic! Daqin had never suffered such a loss as today. Whether it was Dendi or Zhanlo, neither of them was someone they could stop. Since they were powerless to interfere, they would let nature take its course and let it develop. Sun Gang had tried his best. At this time, Zhanlo held his sword and pressed towards the divine hall step by step, as if he had returned to the beginning. However, now the Emperor's aura on his body was extremely amazing, and no one among the forces in the valley would disturb him. Even Sun Gang had been defeated. Who could stop the battle tower? He didn't kill the people of Xiliang, Sun Gang, and Qingji Han, but that didn't mean that he was merciful to others. Just like what he said, his patience had reached its limit. The storm of battle intent swept across, and several Emperor Yuan cultivators of Daqin who were close to the front were killed directly. This was the best example. Evil Qi surged around Qin Hao's body. He looked at the battle tower with the whites of his eyes. The unblemished plain. His aura merged with the great path, and the will of the Emperor flowed together. The battle tower now was the epitome of the heavenly path. There were no blind spots. He had actually reached the level of Senior Sister Muri. His careful teaching back then was not in vain. However, this child had already grown into an existence comparable to his previous life. Moreover, he had the same stubbornness as Zhan Wu. "Don't hold back," Qin Hao said softly. "Why should I hold back?" Zhanlo stopped above the temple. His fair and handsome face was smeared with blood, adding a touch of madness to it. In the valley, the cultivators of the four regions held their breath and watched the battle. They knew in their hearts that there would only be one move between the two. After this move, a legend would disappear from the world. Judging from the powerful aura of the battle tower, the young master of the War God Hall couldn't be defeated. The only person who would die was Dendi. This time, Dendi would be completely dead. In the team of the Ningwu Empire, Ning Tianxing's lips curled into an ugly smile. It seemed that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Emperor Song Yao clenched his fist. His expression became very excited, and there was a trace of unwillingness in the depths of his eyes. Boom! In front of the temple, an incomparably turbulent evil light finally erupted. It was even more majestic than when he killed Three-Eyed. On Qin Hao's shoulder, the demonic mark was extremely dazzling. The evil force was released to the extreme. Endless evil spirits constantly rushed out of his body, wailing as they tried to devour the battle tower in midair. Hoarse laughter, heavy mournful cries, and maniacal laughter. Every evil spirit contained extreme depravity. It was as if the moment they died, they could not be reincarnated and were filled with curses to the world. The evil spirits swept through the sky. Among the many evil spirits, a gray light beam pierced through heaven and earth and shot toward Battle Tower's body. Daqin Three-Eyed became a part of the evil spirit. His divine eyes of illumination became the evil eye. Its ability was controlled by Qin Hao, just like Lugue after his death. This was the power of the evil fetus. It gathered all the laws into one and refined the power of the will of the ancient emperors. This was the philosophy of the evil soul, divine glory creating God. It gathered all living things to devour the heavenly path and replace it. Battle Tower stared at the evil spirits. The power of the will of the heavenly path contained in these monsters was very weak to him, but each of their qualities was very crazy. It was so weak that the danger transmitted to him was extremely strong. Maybe you shouldn't give up your true self. Battle Tower slowly raised his sword. The fanatical fighting will turned into a storm of the great path. The will of the Emperor merged with the heavenly path and shot out 1,000-foot sword light. The sword of divine will flew down diagonally. At this moment, his body was dazzling, as if he was possessed by the god of war. If Qin Hao hadn't given up on breaking through to the true self, perhaps the ending would have been slightly different. At least Battle Tower felt that the evil spirits driven by the will of the Emperor had the strength to break through the flawless realm. They might have caused him an indelible injury. However, Denda's fate wouldn't change. Whoosh! The sword light flew past, carrying the will of the heavenly path. It was like the gods punishing the sins of the world. Wherever the sword light passed, the evil spirits collapsed. Whether it was Lugue's nether evil body, the evil light of three-eyed eyes, or the tens of thousands of evil Dilly, they were all eliminated by the sword light of the god of war. One sword broke all laws. Chapter 1835. There was a heavy thud in front of the temple's door as Qin Hao and Mu Yue fell down again. The evil aura binding their bodies had completely dissipated. At this moment, there were tens of thousands of holes in the sky staircase. The majestic temple was riddled with holes. It was pierced through from top to bottom by the endless battle intent. Without the protection of the divine will, the main hall was no different from an ordinary palace. It couldn't withstand this power. Countless experts floated in the air, watching from afar. Qin Hao lay motionless on the ground. Was this battle finally over? Even though Dende had swept through the world 600 years ago, he was still defeated by Zhan Lu's sword. Many emperors sighed. In the Phoenix God race, Monarch Jingji had a helpless expression. He didn't know which senior Qin Hao had formed a relationship with. He didn't even have the time to tell Qin Hao the truth about the phoenix feather before the battle ended. Now, whether he said it or not, it was meaningless. Monarch Jingji didn't have the ability to interfere. Unless the phoenix ancestor came personally, who could stop Zhan Lu? Song Yao's face trembled. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. His eyes were filled with extreme hatred. Finally, was Qin Hao dead? His son Feng's revenge, his father Meng Tao's blood debt, and all the emperors of his family had been destroyed by Qin Hao. At this moment, this hatred was severed by Zhan Lu's sword. His wish was fulfilled. Song Yao finally spat out the resentment in his heart. However, even though Qin Hao was dead, he still felt unhappy because he didn't die by Song Yao's hands. Far away from God Burial Valley, violent explosions resounded. Meng Xiang and Jin Chen's battle had yet to end. Ning Tianqing glanced over and sneered in his heart. True self, what can an emperor do about it? They couldn't protect Qin Hao either. Thinking back, He had invited Qin Hao time and time again. If Qin Hao could help him unify the southern region, he wouldn't have ended up like this. If the two of them worked together, they wouldn't have ended up like this. Although Ning Tianxing didn't have the ability to take Mu Yue away from the battle tower, at least if Qin Hao cooperated with him, there would be a higher chance of saving her. Unfortunately, the other party didn't know how to appreciate favors. It was good that he died. At this time, Ning Tianxing suddenly thought of something. He looked at the ferries of Phoenix Flower Island and found Xiao Han. He shouted loudly, "The son-in-law of Emperor Xiao of the Northern Territory is seriously injured and on the verge of death. As husband and wife, Princess Jingyue, shouldn't you hurry up and do something?" Oh, sorry, this crown prince shouldn't have said so much. However, it really makes people disappointed. Sharp gazes from the Phoenix Flower Island team looked at Ning Tianxing. Among them, Yun Ro's eyes were filled with intense killing intent. The Crown Prince of the Southern Territories' Martial Ning Empire wanted to drag Xiao Han down with him. He wanted her to die with Dendi. How vicious was his intention! Many emperors of the four regions looked at Ning Tianxing. No one present was a fool. They could tell the relationship between Xiao Han and Dendi from his words. However, Ning Tianxing's words were too provocative at this time in front of the battle tower. In front of the Divine Hall, Qin Hao's fingers moved. When he heard the name of Xiao Han, he, who was exhausted, was supported by a force. He stood up shakily. His terrible eyes fell on Ning Tianxing's face. A low and hoarse voice came from his throat. "If I don't die, I will kill you and destroy Marshal Ning." I misspoke. Is my brother still alive? This is great. I'm sorry. How can I be qualified to call the monarch of Daqin my brother now? Ning Tianxing apologized again and again. He was full of smiles and didn't hide his hypocrisy at all. Qualification? Who didn't have the qualification to call a person who was about to die? From now on, Nightnet Palace of the Southern Territory declares war on Marshal Ning. Nightnet Palace of the Southern Territory said coldly. Ning Hong, the Palace Lord of Nightnet Palace, said coldly. Emperor Ning Wu frowned. The Jing clan has entered the battle. Jing Qingqi immediately shouted. Because of his anger, 7 emperors' rings were faintly discernible beneath him. You! Ning Tianxing's face was full of disdain. Were they qualified? It just so happened that he had successfully become an imperial lord and received a statue to inherit the will of the Wei. When he returned to the southern region, he would start his attack on the Nightnet Palace and the Zheng clan. Xiao Han's eyes fell in the direction of the Divine Hall. Marshal Ning and the Zheng clan's alliance had broken, and the southern region would be plunged into another catastrophe. However, this was not important to her. She flew forward through the sky and flew toward Qin Hao along the sky ladder. Buzz! Above the Divine Hall, a ball of terrible emperors might spread out, radiating boundless heaven and earth. Battle Tower raised his hand and clenched it toward Xiao Han. A ball of mighty fist carrying the momentum of the Wei of heaven blasted toward her. Before the power of the fist, Xiao Han, who had just proven her Wei, seemed so small. Battle Tower! Yun Ro shouted in panic. Boom! The straight fist light slightly deviated from its trajectory and blasted into the distance along the side of Xiao Han. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook violently. A beam of light rose from the ground and rose to a height of 10,000 feet. Then it exploded, and the aftermath swept across hundreds of mountains and razed them to the ground. Battle Tower stopped in time and did not hurt Xiao Han. His eyes reflected Yun Ro's face. The moment he attacked, Yun Ro's eyes were filled with tears. This made his heart tighten, and his attack was involuntarily deflected. Zhanlo didn't make another move. He had been provoked by the people of the four regions one after another. He had reached the limit of his tolerance, but Yun Ro also had a limit. Obviously, Xiao Han's safety was her limit. That shout forced Zhanlo to step back. The incomparably terrible fist light swept through the air in front of her, and was swept away by the Wei will. Xiao Han's face showed no fear. She continued to fly toward Qin Hao with incomparable determination until her feet stepped on the same area as his and stood in front of him. Without saying a word, their eyes met. Light floated in Xiao Han's palm, and a simple scabbard appeared. This was the scabbard he had given her. Immediately, a sword light like blue water was slowly pulled out of the scabbard, piercing Qin Hao's eyes. No matter what the reason is, whether you are Dendi or Qin Hao, you are my husband, Xiao Han said softly. She threw the scabbard at her feet and used her slender shoulders to support Qin Hao's tall body. The two of them stood in front of Mu Yue to protect her. Facing the invincible battle tower in the void, she pointed the ancient profound heavenly sword in her hand at them. At this moment, Mu Yue, who was so weak that she could barely breathe, slowly shed a tear of happiness from the corner of her eye. Her consciousness then escaped into the endless darkness. "Mother!" Qin Bao cried out involuntarily. As soon as she said the word, her mouth was immediately covered by Yun Ro's palm. Under the palm, Dilly trembled slightly, and the struggling Bower was immediately paralyzed in her arms. She fell into a deep sleep, her head drooping on her shoulder. Yun Ro turned her back, not wanting to see what would happen next. That was Xiao Han's choice. She couldn't change the other party's will. The only thing she could do was to hug the only flesh and blood of the Pill Emperor in her arms. Our daughter? Qin Hao's exhausted body was supported by Xiao Han, and he weakly spat out these words. Her pet name is Bower, and her surname is Qin. Xiao Han said Bower's name. She originally wanted to wait for this fellow to give her a proper name, but unfortunately, there was no chance. This child would have to rely on her to face the cruel world in the future. Fortunately, Sister Yun Ro and the Empresses of Phoenix Flower Island were taking care of her. At least Bower would not be bullied. I am not a competent father. A sword light condensed under Qin Hao's palm, and a blood-red blade appeared in the emerald light. I am also not a competent husband. Xiao Han's 9 layers of Emperor's rings swept out, and the power of Tao validation coiled around her body. A crescent moon pendant on her fair neck emitted a strange luster, and an extremely sacred power enveloped her. She was as noble as a goddess. 1. 2 sword lights soared into the sky from the shrine, and the cries of dragons and phoenixes reverberated in the air. The incomparably intense sword lights intertwined like dragons and phoenixes dancing together, and shot towards Zhan Lu in the sky. Zhan Lu looked down and stretched out his palm. His body released an incomparably resplendent and flawless Emperor's light. There were no blind spots in his aura, and it merged with the heavenly Tao. Following that, a world-destroying palm light pressed down, enveloping the entire God Burial Palace and the entire God Burial Valley. East Continent, Southern Border, Qilin Dao Mountain. Dark clouds covered the sky, and a torrential rain fell from the sky. Many mountains were washed away by the mountain torrents, and for some reason, all the torrents swept towards South Sky Peak. The remaining half of the peak that was destroyed by the Sky Shaker race was also completely submerged. At this moment, in front of the main palace of Dao Mountain, Dao ancestor Bo Changji saw 2 rainbows flying through the dark clouds. He slowly loosened his fingers and let out a sigh of relief, saying, "This calamity has passed." "This calamity has passed?" Sect Master Lin Biechio, Vice Sect Master Bo Changji, Shi Yongnian, and many elders in the palace looked at each other in confusion. Whose calamity? Could it be his calamity? Rumble, rumble, rumble! Incomparably terrifying sounds of waves crashing swept out from God Burial Island. The sound waves were so strong that even the people of the East Border, who were far away, could hear it. Countless islands in the East Sea began to sink, and huge waves rolled. Countless fish floated out of the water with their bellies facing up. This puzzled the pair of grandfather and grandson who were fishing. There was no need to cast the net, and it seemed that their luck was pretty good today. But at this moment, the core of God Burial Island, God Burial Palace, disappeared. The entire God Burial Valley vanished without a trace, leaving behind a boundless sinkhole. The remnant auras of Qin Hao, Xiao Han, and Mu Yue slowly disappeared into the sinkhole. The experts of the 4 regions that had already escaped floated in the sky. They looked down with incomparable horror. What a terrifying power! The heavenly Tao could destroy the world. Facing this kind of power, there was simply no way to survive. Dendi, Empress Yue, and that noble and beautiful fairy had all died under the War Tower's palm. God Burial Valley had been blasted away. This could be considered the true end of an era. Denda's life had come to an end. PFFF. A beam of light flew over from far away. Jin Chen, who was fighting with Meng Xiang, saw this scene and couldn't help but spit out blood. He fell down, scaring Jin Chen and the other Kim people into a panic. They stuffed pills into Jin Chen's mouth. Prince Chen was the future pillar of the Western world's warring states kingdom. But in the end, Jin Chen wasn't able to protect the Calamity Sword Emperor. He left behind a regret in his life. In the future, don't step onto Phoenix Flower Island again. Yun Ro hugged Bao and said these incomparably callous words to the lonely War Tower. War Tower's throat moved as if he wanted to say something. But in the end, he didn't say anything. Instead, his grip on his sword tightened and his expression became increasingly cold. Let's go. Yun Ro spoke. She wanted to leave with the other fairies. The God Burial ruins had ended. Whose child is that in your arms? War Tower shouted. His killing intent didn't diminish. He had clearly heard the word mother. This was a vile spawn. Leaving it behind would sooner or later be a disaster. My daughter. Yun Ro didn't even turn her head. You want to kill me? She left her back to the other party. If War Tower attacked, they would kill her as well. Chapter 1836. The goddesses of Phoenix Flower Island flew back to the north. Jean Lu stood in the sky and stared at Yun Ro's back. He couldn't bring himself to kill her. That child was 10 years old, about the same age as when Jean Lu adopted her. He didn't know her name, but he hoped that she could live a peaceful life on Phoenix Flower Island. Although she had lost a great father, with Yun Ro's care, she wouldn't be any worse than other children in the future. Jean Lu's cold eyes scanned the emperors of the 4 domains. His body glowed with the light of the way and he said, Dendi and Mu Yue's death won't affect you all. You Shiliang cultivators should know your place. Don't follow in their footsteps. His threatening voice was heard by Luo Shui and the people of the north border. Emperor Qi Ziqing, Qi Yuan, Fa Zhao and the others didn't dare to look up at Jean Lu. Even Qin Hao was killed by him. Who would dare to challenge the War God Temple? Jean Lu's eyes fell on Lord Moro and stayed there for 2 seconds. The Moro Empire was a vassal of Duqin. After witnessing Qin Hao's death, it was impossible for these people not to have any thoughts. With the opening of the Burial God ruins, the emperors of the 4 domains have found many opportunities. We should focus on cultivation and prosper the East Continent, Lord Moro said. Monarch Mo Luo said with a calm expression. I hope so, Jean Lu said coldly. The dazzling chariot moved slowly. The 9 golden crows pulled the chariot to a stop in front of Jean Lu. He stepped on and his dazzling figure disappeared into the sky, leaving everyone with an unparalleled view of his back. Meng Xiang and Gu Che led a large group of War God guards and followed, heading towards the Sunset Divine Peak in the East World. Let's go. Lord Tatian patted Moro's shoulder. The Moro Empire was between Daqin and the Great Zhou Empire and lacked resources. Since the death of the Moro Patriarch, they had been unable to recover. If they hadn't tied their fate to Daqin, the foundation of the Great Xia would have been destroyed long ago. Let's go. Hegeman Moroa took one last look at the Burial God Palace. It was now a bottomless pit. He could no longer sense Qin Hao's presence. His eyes grew colder and colder. He left with Hierophant Tatian and Mo Sien. The venerable sovereign seemed to have long known his fate. Since he was so stubborn, according to the venerable sovereign's temperament, he should have a backup plan. Mo Luo didn't believe that Qin Hao would really die just like that. That wasn't Dendi who had swept through the 6 directions. Following this, the Azura demon clan only needed to listen to the sovereign's instructions and focus on nurturing Mo Sien. The divine wilderness was about to change, and whether or not they could protect their clan's foundation all depended on Mo Sien. As for the future, Mo Luo believed that the day when the sovereign returned would be the day when Denda's golden age would be reborn. What? You want to fight here? Ning Tianxing's cold eyes stared at Jing Qingqi and Palace Lord Yi. Behind him, the cultivators of the martial Ning Empire stepped forward at the same time. With the 2 imperial lords holding the line, the members of the martial Ning Empire were all in peak condition. Let's leave first, Yi Ninghong said in a deep voice, carrying the unconscious old demon in her hand. Jing Qingqi and great ancestor Jing nodded and ordered their clansmen to take Yi Shuihan, Xiaogua, and the rest of the injured to leave with the Sword Sex team. Immediately, a huge battleship appeared in the void and headed towards western Liang. Makamanji, Shouwuk, Chen Wanqin, Xiaogua, and many others were injured by Zhan Lu's will of the Wei. Although Zhan Lu didn't kill them, the power of his will was so strong that even a trace of it was enough to seriously injure these people. They probably wouldn't be able to recover without a few decades of recuperation. Coincidentally, the Kim people have long admired Senior Zhuiying's swordsmanship. Let's pay a visit to the Sword Palace, Jin Su said to Feng Qianli. Feng Qianli nodded silently and wiped away the tears on his face. Holding the unconscious Hyun Ing in his arms, the disciples of the Sword Palace merged with the Kim people and disappeared in front of the other forces. Damn the Kim people, Feng Gaishi cursed. Feng Gaishi cursed. Just as he was about to kill Xian Ing, the Jin clan escorted her away. Feng Junfei had fought with Makamanji twice. Although he was injured, his foundation wasn't damaged. Feng Gaishi was at the peak of the 8th tier of the Tao realm. Now was the best chance to weaken the Sword Palace. He was very confident that he could kill all the elders and disciples of the Sword Sect. Wind people would clash with the Sword Sect sooner or later, so it was better to strike first. But the Kim people were hateful. There's a chance. Let's go. Feng Junfei's face was pale. Now he was disabled. Although he didn't bring all the elites of his family with him, he still brought 50% of them. It was a great loss. Feng Gaishi glanced at Song Yao. Seeing that Song Yao was approaching the Ning clan, he didn't talk to him and left directly with his father. In fact, the Sky Shaker clan was worse than them, but they didn't deserve sympathy. Song Yao deserved it. Are we going to let Li Chuji go just like that? Song Yao didn't pay attention to Feng Gaishi at all and asked Ning Tianxing. In his impression, Li Chuji was 1,000 times more hateful than Dendi. If he had stayed in the Ning clan just now, he would have joined the battle. Yi Ninghong was just a Tao realm monarch, so he didn't have to worry about her. The proud god of the south, Li Yuan, Arhat Palace, more or less had some relationship with Qin Haodong. He just died, so it's not appropriate to kill his people now. Ning Tianxing was very considerate. Moreover, he faintly felt that Li Wanji wasn't a simple person. If he was related to the proud god, then the situation was hard to say. He couldn't take the risk. In that case, I'll return to the Eastern Sea. You have the voice transmission stone, so we can keep in touch, Song Yao said coldly. He turned into a ray of lonely emperor light and disappeared quickly. Before entering the ruins, the clan had 2 monarch lords and more than 10 monarchs. It was a huge force. Now, he didn't know how to face old ancestor Han Tian. Ma Yingtao was dead, and the most talented of the younger generation, his nephew Ma Yingtao, was also dead. Song Yao could totally imagine the old ancestor's thunderous rage. This was simply a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the Shuo clan. Once they returned, the clan would inevitably lose some territories. Fortunately, the old ancestor was overseeing the clan. Moreover, he had the support of the martial Ning Empire. It was impossible for the Shuo clan to devour them completely. Song Yao needed to go back and have a good discussion with old ancestor Han Tian. Also, Li Chuji's accomplices, Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and the insignificant Western Liang ants. Song Yao wouldn't let these people have an easy time. If there was a trace of possibility, he would bring his troops to raise the Western Liang countries. He would make the lowly citizens of that land be enslaved for life and live worse than animals. In the God Burial Valley, the overlords of the 4 regions and 5 domains left one after another. Only an endless sinkhole was left behind in the originally majestic divine palace. An invisible sadness filled the air, as if it was regretting the fall of an unparalleled monarch. Today's matter was extremely shocking to the East Continent and even the 4 regions. No one knew what kind of shock it would cause when it spread to the outside world. At this moment, in a corner of countless collapsed mountains, a small team dressed in exotic clothing was quietly huddling there. After all the forces left, they carefully went forward to look at the spectacular sinkhole. "Is he really dead?" One of the warriors from Lu Island spoke in an incomprehensible tone. His eyes were filled with disbelief and confusion. "Shut up, Flowing Island," Hidden Blade said in a lifeless voice. His sharp eyes scanned all the Flowing Island martial artists around him. Dead? If Qin Hao was dead, she should have died along with him. This Dendi used some kind of sorcery to deceive everyone's eyes. Even the battle tower was fooled. Terrifying. It was really too terrifying. Regardless of whether it was Dendi or the battle tower, the ability to reverse heaven and earth wasn't something the small Flowing Island could compare to. Hidden Blade decided that she would never set foot in the East Continent again unless the man who had planted the parasite in her appeared again and threatened her life. Otherwise, she would never come to the East Continent again. On the God Burial Desolate Road, the auras of the powerhouses that had originally filled the area became fewer and fewer as time passed. In the end, only a few human rulers and some newly arrived Yuan venerates were active. Many treasures and opportunities in the ruins had been seized by the overlords of the 4 regions. However, there were still some unknown places and some small opportunities that had yet to be discovered. These insignificant things attracted a large number of low-level martialists to fight over them. Life and death battles were still taking place. At this moment, on an incomparably majestic mountain peak in the eastern border of the East Continent, a towering and solemn divine palace seemed to be connected to the sky. Anyone who looked at it would feel reverence for the heavens. They wondered if the person standing at the highest point of this divine palace could see the entire continent. No, that wasn't a person. It should be called a god. This mountain peak belonged to Denda 600 years ago. Now, it belonged to the setting sun battle god. Screech. The long cries of divine birds resounded as a dazzling divine chariot arrived and landed in the huge divine palace building. This is what happened. Zhang Yin and Lu Gui are dead. Han Lingxian lost a 3-eyed martialist. All the overlord families of the 4 regions suffered great losses. Among them, the sky-shaking martialist race and the wind people suffered the most. Yuntian Palace, Mythical Flame Hall, Ghost Desolate Land and Celestial Cliffs were all wiped out. Not a single one was left. Zhanlo reported everything that had happened in the ruins one by one. In front of him, in an incomparably noble and luxurious palace, a divine throne stood at the highest point at the end. The divine throne emitted an incomparably dazzling radiance that made it impossible for anyone to look at it directly. One could only feel a surging pressure. Even someone as strong as Zhanlo, who was in the unblemished emperor path, felt an irresistible pressure in the face of the majestic radiance. This pressure was imprinted in his bones and would not change as his cultivation base increased. Muyue and he are both dead? A voice came from the radiance. It was emotionless, but it was incomparably majestic. No one would dare lie when questioned by this voice. I did it myself. Jeanlo lowered his head and replied. Are they really dead? In the endless radiance, the voice came again. The atmosphere in the palace was invisibly oppressive. No, I sent him an ant way away from buried God Island. Jeanlo pursed his lips and replied. At this moment, he, who was insufferably mighty in buried God Island, was like a child who had made a mistake. He felt a little lonely and helpless. Reincarnation palm. The sunset battle god smiled. You. Jeanlo was astonished. I saw it all. You did well. In this way, the people of the 4 regions will think that Dendi was completely killed by you. It will also make those guys who are hiding in the dark impatiently roll out from the dirty shadows. Zhan Wu let out a long sigh. He had been planning for 600 years, and today was the moment that made him most worried. If there was a mistake in a single detail, the 600 years of careful planning would be wasted. He was also sweating profusely. Fortunately, everything was going smoothly. When Jeanlo heard this, a great deal of surprise appeared on his face. He always knew in his heart that his adoptive father had no intention of eradicating Dendi. In the eyes of the outside world, his adoptive father was the cold-blooded and ruthless sunset battle god who occupied Dendi's sunset peak. But Jeanlo knew best that in this world, there was no one who cared more about Dendi than his adoptive father. Even so, Jeanlo was still surprised at the moment when he confirmed what he thought. Chapter 1837. In God Burial Valley, the final palm strike was known as the reincarnation palm. The might of this palm strike was peerless, and it could directly destroy one's divine soul. The essence of this palm strike was that the user could control the power of the palm strike and reconstruct their divine soul. As the name suggested, it was the reincarnation palm. It was not easy for a martial artist's divine soul to instantly reform after it was shattered. It had extremely high requirements for the user of this palm technique. If there was even the slightest deviation in the control of the palm energy, it would result in the victim being consigned to eternal damnation. Apart from the sunset battle god, Wartower had cultivated the reincarnation palm to this step. First, he used the flawless Tao to crush Qin Hao and Mu Yue's divine souls. Then, he urged the palm energy into their bodies and gradually helped them reform. During this time, he took advantage of the huge commotion caused by the palm to quietly teleport them away. Although it seemed complicated, it was actually a simple task for Zhan Wu. No one would see any flaws. With his flawless emperor cultivation, the emperors present, even Meng Xiang and Jin Chun, who had just stepped into the true self realm, would not be able to see any clues. Everyone would believe that Dendi had died based on the aura left behind in Qin Hao's palm. Wartower thought that Qin Hao, Mu Yue, and the northern frontier princess should have already woken up. The reincarnation palm is a palm technique that even he has forgotten. Perhaps in his memory, he has simply lost the use of this palm. Zhan Wu sat upright in the dazzling divine light, letting out a distant sigh. This was what it meant to fight to live after putting one's life on the line. Qin Hao's memories were not complete. Since his consciousness had awakened in his previous life, he had lost everything. It was precisely because of this that Wartower had the opportunity to use the reincarnation palm. Otherwise, even Zhan Wu would not know how to end the situation. Today, if Qin Hao had resisted with all his might, the consequences would have been that the reincarnation palm would have been ineffective. Fortunately, everything had gone smoothly. It seemed that Qin Hao had also taken advantage of the situation and deliberately died in the reincarnation palm. Zhan Wu could not see through this. In his impression, even if that fellow's memories were not complete, his personality should not have changed. Could it be that he still had something to rely on? Zhan Wu thought of the divine tool in God Burial Temple. Perhaps Qin Hao thought that the divine tool could save his and Mu Yue's lives, so he deliberately died in War Tower. It was no longer important. Even if he did not use the divine artifact, he would not die. His daughter is very cute. Is Yun. The battle tower didn't mention the evil spirits. Foster father had seen the process of the battle in God Burial Valley. In that case, the setting sun battle god would naturally consider the change in Pill Emperor's temperament in this life. Han Lingxian. War Tower was worried. She has not completely mastered the Nirvana Emperor's road. Before she has the confidence to kill me, she will not come to Sunset Peak. You exposed your cultivation, which put another layer of pressure on her. Don't worry about her for now. Pay more attention to the 5 realms. The East Continent will be in chaos soon, Zhan Wu said. What about Western Liang and Beijiang? Zhan Wu was worried. Xiaogua's group was too weak. They might not be able to protect themselves. I will order people to deal with them. There was no need for the War Tower to take care of Xiliang. The War Martial Assembly would let the Imperial Censor stay there. The Imperial Censor's cultivation level was higher than the War Tower's, which was enough to reassure people. He thought for a while and said, also, you should go and deal with Empress Shui Yao. This show has to go on and let the world see the punishment the War God Temple deserve. Father, Zhan Lang and the others, you don't need to know the truth. You may leave, Zhan Wu said majestically. Yes, Zhanlo will take his leave. Zhanlo bowed and retreated. He didn't need to know, but he could vaguely guess. The temple fell silent. After a long time, a figure slowly walked out of the resplendent divine throne. His sturdy body was covered in a simple and thin green robe. The corners of his eyes were filled with the wrinkles of time as he walked up the stairs to the top of the temple. Standing at the top of the temple, he could see everything in the East Continent through the sea of clouds, including the divine wilderness continent beneath his feet. I'm old, but you are still as young as before. Zhan Wu smiled. He stood at the top of the sunset with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at the endless sea of clouds in front of him. The rolling clouds were mysterious and spectacular. It was like a life full of waves, hiding many dusty stories. At this time, there was an indescribable loneliness in his figure. On the divine peak, in another palace, War Tower took off his armor and put his sword on the sword rack. He dragged his tired body and sat down heavily on the ground. He looked at the lantern-like fire lamp beside him. It was Zhang Yan's toy when he was young. There was a faint sadness in War Tower's eyes. When he talked with his adoptive father, the latter didn't mention Zhang Yan at all. He seemed a little cold. However, this was the real adoptive father. It didn't matter if Lu Gui, Zhang Yan, Meng Xiang, and even War Tower died today. His adoptive father only had Dendi in his eyes. In this scheme, all the sacrifices were reasonable. The news of God Burial Valley quickly spread to the outside world. It swept through the entire divine wilderness like a storm. The 4 regions were shaken. Among them, the Daqin Empire was shaken the most. Many mysterious forces appeared secretly to mislead the people. Some lords even participated in the rebellion and began to disturb the Daqin Empire. Because of this, Emperor Ling Xian mobilized troops to suppress the rebellion. Several large-scale battles broke out in the empire. 3 days after Dendu was killed, the young master of the War God Temple, War Tower, led troops again. The sword traveled to the Water Jade Holy Empire and the Golden Crow Chariot arrived at the Qilin Dao Mountain again. Empress Shui Yao had the previous plan. After leaving the ruins, she immediately moved the entire Empress Palace to the side of the main hall of the Dao Mountain to seek the protection of the Tao Ancestor. In the sky above the Dao Mountain, the Tao Ancestor Bo Changji and War Tower engaged in a fierce battle. Both sides were evenly matched. Afterwards, War Tower and the War God guards left. The battle from beginning to end was very fast. It didn't even take half a cup of tea's time. At the same time, Meng Xiang led 4 divine generals and 5,000 divine guards to the great Zhou Empire. When they arrived, the Zhou imperial palace was empty. Zhou Wudao's entire family disappeared from the world at an unbelievable speed. Even Grandmaster Zhou Wendi disappeared without a trace. From then on, there was no news of the entire family. Even so, many aristocratic families in the Zhou city were slaughtered by the War God Guard. They died under Meng Xiang's power. Since they couldn't catch Zhou Wudao, they killed some of the Zhou clan's vassals to establish their power and avenge Zhang Yin. A huge naval battle also broke out in the Penglai Sea of the East Sea. It was the most spectacular battle in history. After Tsang Yao and his son lost in the ruins and Ma Tao was killed by Qin Hao, more than 80% of the family's emperor stage masters died. This gave the Shua clan a rare opportunity to expand. In this battle, the Shua clan's Daohai Grandmaster and the Ji clan's Daohai Grandmaster fought fiercely. Both clans suffered heavy casualties. After paying a certain price, Daohai Grandmaster severely injured Daohai Grandmaster. The Shua clan began to press on, while the Ji clan retreated step by step. They gave up more than 70% of their island territories. From then on, the overlord of the East Sea could only hide in their nest. Half of the East Sea was controlled by the Shua clan. It was not easy to take down the Ji clan's nest. Although Daohai Grandmaster was severely injured, there was a great formation and several powerful sea demons on the main island. The Shua clan also suffered heavy losses. They temporarily stopped the war and further expansion. After all, they were not confident that they could take down the Ji clan's nest. After the Shua clan stopped the war, they still sent their experts to besiege the Ji clan's nest. This siege lasted for more than 10 years. During this period, any Ji clan member who tried to escape by chance was caught and killed. Moreover, the Shua clan's prince, Shua Xiu, would occasionally bring people to the Ji clan's great formation to annoy Daohai Grandmaster. Since the old man was severely injured, Shua Xiu was not worried about the danger. The situation between the various forces in the East continent was very serious. The subordinate sect was constantly fighting, and the southern region was also in a frenzy of war. The third branch of the Ningwu Empire came out in full force. However, they did not go to war with the Night Luo Palace. Instead, they went straight to the Scorching Sun Sacred Mountain and attacked the Sun God of the southern region. The Sun God was severely injured by Zhan Wu and could not use his flames of Tao. The Sage Hall could not withstand Ning Wu's attack at all. In this battle, countless elders and disciples died tragically, and their vitality was greatly damaged. Fortunately, the sacred mountain was protected by the fire spirit. With the help of the will left by the grand ancestors, they could barely withstand the suppression of Ning Wu Ming Emperor and Ning Tianxing and avoid the danger of their sect being destroyed. Ning Tianxing's attack did not succeed, but he did not dare to go too far. He was worried that he would be attacked from both sides. Ning Wu still had to face the Night Luo Palace and the Zheng clan, especially the Li clan and the Arhat Palace of the Proud God Empire, which made him very wary. Therefore, he led the third branch's Emperor Dao experts back to Ning Wu. However, since they did not get rid of the Sun God in this battle, the enmity was irreconcilable. Compared to the East Continent and the southern region, Western Liang and the northern border were exceptionally quiet. The various forces were more well-behaved than ever before. When the news of Qin Hao's death was sent back, it was as if nothing had happened. It was so quiet that it was somewhat shameful. Regarding this, the outside world mocked Western Liang for being cowardly. However, this was also very normal. Becoming enemies with the War God Temple was tantamount to courting death. In short, the battle in the God Burial Valley completely crushed the dignity of the people of Western Liang. Time passed day by day, and Denda's death was quickly forgotten by the world, just like 600 years ago. In the god burial ruins, the killing was still happening. After the various overlord forces returned, the small forces gradually flocked to the deserted island of the god burial valley and found a lot of Emperor Dao resources. These resources were disdained by the overlord forces. Even the will of a lower-leveled arch was a supreme treasure to the small forces. As time passed, the deserted island of the god burial valley was no longer mysterious. Gradually, low-level cultivators stepped into the deserted island and began to wander around the edges. This deserted island that was revered by the world was eventually used by the various overlord forces as a training ground for their direct disciples. In the future, the outstanding descendants of the clans would be sent to the deserted island to temper themselves after their coming-of-age ceremony. This was considered a test for their future successors. In the blink of an eye, 20 years had passed. Western Liang. Luo Shui Empire. True Extreme Peak. Swish. Swish. You are qualified to receive my third spear strike. The Imperial Lord of Daqin, Tai Hui, floated in the air. His golden cape fluttered wildly behind him. He looked up at the sword formation with admiration. Sword Master True Extreme's control of Dao was becoming more and more exquisite. During the battle at the Dark Abyss, his battle with Showuk had yet to end. For the past 20 years, Tai Hui would come to Western Liang once every 3 years to spar with Sword Master True Extreme. Of course, although it was called a spar, the battle between the two was actually very dangerous. If a single flaw was exposed, Tai Hui would kill Showuk without mercy. Unfortunately, Sword Master True Extreme didn't give him the chance. In the past 20 years, his control of Sword Dao had become stronger and stronger. Now, even though Tai Hui had become an extreme Dao powerhouse, he still felt great pressure in the face of these terrifying golden sword intents. Chapter 1838. In the void, blinding golden sword rays fell. The sword rays were intertwined, and each ray was like a powerful monarch weapon. They contained terrifying penetrative power and were indestructible. Tai Hui yelled and opened his palms. 9 dazzling monarch halos spun under his feet. Majestic monarch intent flowed up and shone brightly. Divine spears formed around him. Tai Hui looked up and the divine spears pierced through the void. They collided with the sword rays and instantly, the two rules dissipated. In another 20 years, your monarch Dao might surpass mine. Tai Hui dispersed the monarch halos and said to the exit of a peak in front of him. On the peak, a young man sat cross-legged in front of a cottage. His eyebrows were like swords and he had an extraordinary temperament. Shocking sword intent flowed around him. Showuk didn't seem to hear Tai Hui's words. He sat there with his eyes closed. Streaks of sword Dao radiance could be seen around him. I'll come again in 3 years. Tai Hui smiled. He didn't mind. In the past 20 years, Sword Master Zhenji had never responded to him. Today was no exception. A dazzling ray of Emperor light shot towards the East Continent, disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. All the cultivators and commoners within a radius of several hundred li raised their heads and looked towards the East Continent or the true extreme peak, all of them revealing expressions of worship. Every 3 years, Daqin Saint Lord Tai Hui would come here to fight with Sword Master Zhenji. Every battle would attract a large number of cultivators to watch and admire the two sovereigns. Of course, they would watch from afar and not dare to disturb them. At this moment, Showuk sensed Tai Hui's aura leaving. He slowly opened his eyes and murmured, "I hope you can go all out in 3 years." There was still a gap between him and Tai Hui. However, Tai Hui had never had an advantage in terms of cultivation level. Since when did Sword Emperor Zhenji become so humble? Many powerful figures landed from the void. Luo Shui Emperor Yi Shuihan, West Qin King Xiaogua, Wasteland Qin People's Clan Leader Qin Yun, and Fengli Temple's Palace Lord Chen, Wan Qin, appeared before Showuk and came to the true extreme peak. Greetings, master. Tai Hui ran quite fast. He must have felt guilty and fought with master with all his might. Beside Yi Shuihan and the others, 2 juniors, a man and a woman, accompanied them. The man was handsome and confident, and his body naturally overflowed with a distinguished temperament. The woman's facial features were extremely exquisite, and there was a wisp of sharpness hidden between her brows. She had the bearing of a woman who wasn't inferior to men. Yi Huan, the eldest son of Luo Shui's emperor Yi Shuihan, the current crown prince of Luo Shui. Qin Qian, Qin Yun and Ah Ku's daughter. Both of them were disciples of Sword Emperor Jinji, and were Shou Wu's only 2 disciples. It wasn't that he wasn't powerful enough, but that he didn't take any more disciples. Even the most talented disciples in the sword sect didn't have the fortune to serve Sword Master Jinji. Otherwise, Shou Wu had more than 2 disciples. Countless talents from Western Liang, Beijiang, and even the southern region would want to be his disciples. You're already in your 30s. How can you call Tai Hui by his real name? Shou Wu glanced at the man. Ha ha ha, in your disciple's heart, other than father, master, and uncles, there are no experts or elders. Yi Huan laughed loudly. Qin Qian rolled her eyes at Yi Huan and said, "You've stolen my flattery. Tai Hui is about to enter the true self. Don't be so rude in front of outsiders. Otherwise, you'll embarrass the Luo Shui royal family," Yi Shuihan said. His slightly plump facial features gave him a sense of stability, giving him the majesty of an emperor. "Yes, father," Yi Huan said seriously, "there are no outsiders here, right? Have you learned to banter with me?" Yi Shuihan's expression sank. Yi Huan immediately lowered his head. In a blink of an eye, it's been 20 years. Chen Wanqin was dressed in a dignified and luxurious robe. As she watched Yi Huan and Yi Shuihan bicker, she recalled how they looked back then. They really resembled each other. That's right. It's been 20 years. Qin Yun raised his head and said with a tone of vicissitudes. Buried God's palm strike had caused Qin Hao to leave them for 20 years. From then on, they were separated by life and death. Now, the children had grown up and even had families. At this moment, the space became somewhat solemn and heavy. The elders were filled with a sense of sadness. Yi Huan and Qin Qian saw this and obediently shut their mouth. They knew that their master and uncles were reminiscing about that person again. It was the unparalleled legend that they had never had the chance to meet since they were young. "How's the war in the southern region?" After a long time, Shou Wu asked. Little Nine ordered someone to deliver the war report. Xiaogua's palm glowed and a secret scroll flew to Shou Wu. Shou Wu received it and opened it. He roughly scanned it and nodded. The sacred hall's Yang god had entered the formation and temporarily blocked Ning Tianxing. With the Arhat Palace and the Li clan watching from the sidelines, Ning Tianxing was like a thorn in his back. His military movements were restrained. In the short term, it was impossible for him to succeed in his ambition of unifying the southern region. Even so, the solemn expression on Shou Wu's face did not lessen. Relying on the opportunities and treasures obtained from the ruins, Ning Tianxing's cultivation speed was extremely fast. He had stepped into the true self realm. In addition, another emperor lord had appeared in the third lineage. The overall strength of the family had increased by several times. If this was in the past, Ning Tianxing would have been able to sweep away the other 6 heroes of the southern region. It was simply unimaginable. Now, Ning Tianxing was truly the number 1 in the southern region. In a one-on-one battle, no force could compete with him. Shou Wu's gaze fell on Xiaogua and the others. Of course, Ning Tianxing wasn't the only one who had become stronger. Knight Luo Palace's Peak of Tao, old ancestor Zheng's breakthrough to the Imperial Lord Realm, and Xiaogua's realm had all improved. But if they wanted to rely on Knight Luo Palace and the Zheng clan, it was impossible to stop Ning Tianxing. Even after the sword sect joined the battle, they still couldn't equalize the strength of the two sides. It was only until recently that the young god came out of seclusion and broke through to the true self realm and challenged Ning Tianqing to a battle on the sacred mountain that both sides were injured. Only then did they manage to suppress Ning Tianqing's arrogance and make him not dare to be arrogant. Senior Yang is indeed a rare genius in terms of talent and control of the Dao fire. If it wasn't for the old illness caused by Zhan Wu, he might really be able to suppress Ning Tianqing and fight for a chance for the four sects to counterattack. Chen Wanqin said. Although she didn't witness that battle, from the battle report sent by Little Nine, her young god was also severely injured. This was already very rare. Back then, he had blocked Zhan Wu's golden crow flames. Among the heroes of the four regions of the God Burial Valley, who else had such ability? Moreover, in 20 years, he had stabilized his injuries and broken through to the true self realm. Even they were ashamed of their inferiority. If it wasn't for the old illness left in his body, his young god would definitely be able to suppress Ning Tianqing. Wuk shook his head and said, "Don't be fooled by his performance. Ning Tianqing is not a simple person. He definitely didn't use his full strength. Moreover, don't forget that the Ning clan still has a great ancestor alive. Before we entered the Emperor's path, he had already stepped into the true self realm. The Ning clan's foundation was very terrifying. If only Big Brother were here, it would be good." Xiaogua said softly. Yi Shuihan and the others felt a little heavy in their hearts. Since the fall of Qin Hao, there were very few people of the same generation who could suppress Ning Tianqing in the four regions. There was no one who could stop him, not even Showuk. Master has entered the true self realm. Ning Tianqing, that sanctimonious person, has nothing to fear. Yi Huan had absolute confidence in his master's swordsmanship. It's still too early to reach the true self realm. Moreover, the outcome of the battle with him is not certain. Showuk smiled. He had just comprehended a trace of the true meaning of the Great Path and had stepped into the threshold of the peak of Proving Way. It was similar to Lubi's realm in the past. Although he couldn't defeat Ning Tianqing, he wasn't afraid of fighting. "We can only rely on you." Yi Shuihan sighed. They couldn't count on them. The only person who was qualified to compete with Ning Tianqing was Showuk. "I'll make a trip to Shao Imperial Palace. You guys pay attention to the situation in the southern region." Showuk stood up and patted Yi Shuihan's shoulder. A ray of sword will condensed under his feet and turned into a dazzling emperor's sword. At the same time, the space was cut open by a ray of sword radiance. He rode his sword into the void and his aura disappeared instantly. For 20 years, he had guarded Western Liang on behalf of Qin Hao, guarding against the invasion of the East Continent. The Heaven Shaker clan was restrained by the Shuo Xiu clan and was not in danger for the time being. However, the Wind people of the southern region, the Heaven's Cliffs, the desolate land of ghosts, and the Yuntian Palace had once formed an extremely powerful coalition to sweep Western Liang. Strangely, that extremely powerful coalition had died midway. Countless Emperor Dao experts of the four clans had died. Even the Alliance Master Feng Junfei himself had been fatally injured. If he hadn't run away, he would have died on the spot. This incident had only spread from the four regions after it had happened. At that time, it had frightened Yi Shuihan quite a bit. If old Feng had really succeeded, it would have been difficult to stop him once he came over. Showuk found it very strange. He still couldn't guess who had intercepted the enemy. To be able to eliminate the experts of the Wind people, the Heaven's Cliffs, the desolate land of ghosts, and the Yuntian Palace in one fell swoop, causing the four clans to suffer great losses, one could see how powerful the person's Dao intent was. It was simply terrifying. This person should have a great relationship with Qin Hao. It was very likely that he was someone they knew. However, as for who exactly he was, Wuk and Yi Shuihan couldn't guess. They didn't have any impression of such an expert, so it was still a mystery even now. However, it was still a good thing. Western Liang and the northern border were currently very peaceful. Only the southern region's martial Ning Empire was full of ambition and wanted to conquer the world. If necessary, Wuk would have to return to participate in the war, leaving Western Liang and the southern region to run between. It's been hard on him all these years. Qin Yun looked at the void that had closed. Qin Yun looked at the closing crack in the void. His aura had reached the Imperial Master Realm, which was much stronger than Xiaogua and Yi Shuihan. This was all thanks to the Tao intent of the revered eagle that Qin Hao had left for him. However, compared to Shou Wuk, Qin Yun was still much weaker. If it weren't for Wuk's protection, Western Liang and the northern border would be in an unknown state. The northern border. Liaodu Shao Imperial Palace. Emperor Shao and Qin Hao's parents lived here. At this moment, an extremely dazzling golden sword beam pierced through space and appeared in the sky above Liaodu. An extremely terrifying emperor's aura descended, causing all the citizens and martial artists in the city to look up. Looking at the figure in the sky, the citizens didn't panic. On the contrary, they had a faint smile on their faces. They knew who that person was. He was Sword Master Jinji, a close friend of Prince Consort Qin and the princess. After the death of the Prince Consort and the princess, Sword Master Jinji often came to Shao Imperial Palace to visit Emperor Shao. When talking about Emperor Shao, the citizens had a heavy heart. They hoped that Emperor Shao could pull himself together and walk out of the shadow of the Prince Consort and the Princess' death as soon as possible. Chapter 1839. When that incident spread back to the northern borders, it dealt a heavy blow to Shao Yi, Qin Dingtian, and his wife. Qin Hao was the successor of the East Continent's Dendi, which caused Qin Dingtian and Tang Rong to be unable to accept. It was only after many years that the knot in their hearts gradually loosened. Every time they recalled Qin Hao's treatment of their family, they firmly believed that he was their biological son and that he wasn't possessed. In fact, Qin Hao's situation was indeed different from possession. He had fused with the body's original memories and inherited the other party's feelings for his family and parent. He didn't destroy the soul of the body's original owner. The two had different meanings. To Qin Hao, Qin Dingtian and Tang Rong were like his second parents. However, when Qin Dingtian and Tang Rong recovered, they fell into the second torture. Their son was no longer around. Shao Yi's pain wasn't any less than theirs. There was a period of time when he was muddle-headed and foolish. He wanted to end his life. He only had one daughter, Shao Han, and she wasn't by his side since she was young. When he finally reunited with her and his daughter had a family, she and Qin Hao both died in the hands of the War God Temple. The Sunset War God stepped on Shao Yi's head and crushed his will and dignity to the ground. He couldn't resist. This was the most painful thing in the world. He knew who his enemy was, but he couldn't take revenge. The pain, guilt, and self-blame accumulated in the bottom of his heart. It would constantly devour a person's fighting spirit and eventually turn him into an empty shell without a soul. Fortunately, Qin Bao Er's appearance ignited Shao Yi's hope of living. She was Qin Hao and Shao Han's daughter, his granddaughter. Shao Han's blood flowed in her body. When the people of Phoenix Flower Island sent Qin Bao Er's image, it was like a gift from the heavens. Shao Yi was pleasantly surprised and grieved. He would never have thought that he wasn't alone in this world. He still had a granddaughter. It was a pity that his granddaughter's fate was even more tragic than Shao Han's. She had lost both her parents at a young age. The heavens were too cruel to his Shao family. At this moment, Qin Dingtian and his wife were also in Shao Yi's bedroom. The three of them sat side by side. Their clothes were neat and tidy, and their expressions were solemn. It felt like a ritual. At the same time, they were looking at an illusion that appeared in front of them. In the illusory scene, there was a young girl affectionately calling out Grandpa, Grandpa, and Grandma. She was doing some weird actions, looking lively and cute. The three elders couldn't help but laugh, just like Xiao Han when she was a young girl. Look, the girl's eyes were like Hao Er's. They were as bright as the sun, tough and bright. She didn't look. They weren't alike at all. Hao Er was too deep. His eyes were like an abyss, and his aura was like a rainbow. It was fine if he didn't move, but when he did, heaven and earth would be shocked. This girl's eyes, nose, and mouth were all like Han Er's. Xiao Yi chuckled. Her. To Tian and. Xiao Yi said firmly. Qin Dingtian and Tang Rong were a little unhappy. She was like Han Er in every way. Giving birth wasn't a matter of one person. Swish. An extremely fast sword light descended upon the Xiao Palace. It went straight for the bedroom. The palace guards all retreated. Uncle Yi, godfather, godmother, you are all here. Showuk walked in with a smile. He was holding a flower pot sculpture in his hand. It was made of the East Continent's rainbow sea stone. A peach tree grew in the flower pot. It was shining like a living thing. It was extraordinarily noble. Xiao Yi, Qin Dingtian, and Tang Rong hurriedly stood up and welcomed Showuk. It was as if they saw their son, Qin Hao. Their eyes were incomparably affectionate. Why are you here? Xiao Yi said with joy. Wuk was overseeing the true extreme peak to prevent Ning Wu's army from crossing the sea to western Liang. He would only come during festivals. It was a little sudden today. A few days ago, Island Lord Yun Ro ordered someone to send it over. Bao Er personally sculpted it. After I settled some personal matters, I immediately sent it over. Wuk smiled and handed the pot sculpture to Tang Rong. Tang Rong observed it carefully and praised it repeatedly. The guards hugged it like a treasure and didn't want to let it go. You can just order someone to send it over. You are about to break through the realm. You should focus on cultivation. Xiao Yi pulled Wuk over and sat down. Right now, his cultivation level was not as strong as the juniors, but in terms of the Emperor's Dao, Xiao Yi was still able to sense some of it. Wuk's aura had already reached its limit, and the next step was to break through to the true self realm. To those at the monarch realm, this was an extremely important stage in their lives. Everything is fine in the north. With Zhan Zhu and Saint Emperor Jiang guarding, you can rest assured. Besides, there is also that branch of the clan. Qin Dingtian also advised. When he mentioned that branch of the clan, he was especially cautious and spoke softly, afraid that others would hear. It was fine. The true self-realm was the sublimation of one's state of mind. Wuk naturally knew what that branch represented. As for breaking through the realm, he didn't have the confidence to defeat the true self-realm. We don't know much about high-level Emperor Dao cultivation. It's good that you know, Qin Dingtian said with relief. Wuk is here. A loud and clear voice echoed. Immediately after, several figures walked into the room. Zhan Guanghe, Zhan Wenjie, and a group of Emperor Dao experts from the Slayer clan came to welcome the true extreme sword master. Senior, Uncle Zhe, and all the elders. Wuk stood up from his seat and bowed to everyone. With his current cultivation, he didn't need to bow, but he had to show respect to them based on seniority. Sit. Zhan Guanghe laughed. Sit down. Xiao Yi said. There were no outsiders here, and there was no need to care about the details. The group of Emperor Dao experts then sat to the side. Wuk, is there any news of Yi? Zhan Wenjie asked, and this question made the atmosphere in the room more serious. He was at the Sunset Peak. As for the details, they didn't know. Wuk looked at Zhan Guanghe and sympathized with him. After the battle at the God Burial Valley, the Western Liang and Northern Borderline members who entered the ruins returned safely. Only Zhan Yi was detained and brought to the Sunset Peak by the War God Guard. Ming Xiang sent a message on behalf of Zhan Wu, saying that it was a lesson for the Slayer clan to reflect. There were 30,000 War God Guards stationed at the Sunset Peak, and they were all direct descendants of the Sunset Battle God. They were watertight and couldn't get through. Zhan Yi was detained there, and no one knew what happened to him. However, it shouldn't be much better. Don't mention it. Zhan Zhu scolded with a serious face. Every time the true extreme sword master came to visit the Shao Emperor Palace, Zhan Wenjie would ask the same question. Zhan Wenjie might not feel good, but he just had to bear it. Why did he have to make everyone unhappy? Sigh. Zhan Wenjie sighed and lowered his head. If you say another word, get out. I hate sighs the most. Zhan Guang, he said angrily. After all, he was an old general from the same generation as the 4 great godly generals. He had a fiery temper. Zhan Wenjie didn't dare to say another word. He even breathed carefully. Zhan Zhu, we understand Brother Wenjie's feelings. If it wasn't for Hao Shao Yi didn't continue. The atmosphere in the room was very tense. That incident was like a rock in their hearts. Every time it was mentioned, they couldn't breathe. It was as if this group of men who weren't even afraid of death were going to collapse. The space became silent. Shao Yi and Qin Dingtian, who were in a good mood, also became serious because of Zhan Wenjie's words. Shou Wuke wasn't a person who liked to talk. As a result, he didn't know what to say. Since we're here, I'll mention it. Do you think that the incident at the West Sea was done by Hao? Qin Dingtian looked at Shou Wuke with an extremely serious expression. This young man's understanding of his son was even greater than his father's. Absolutely impossible. Shou Wuke understood Qin Hao's thoughts. It was impossible for Qin Hao to be alive. Even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance, the person who intercepted and killed the East Continent's alliance army wasn't Qin Hao himself. Who was Feng Junfei? Wind People's old patriarch, the renowned East Continent's sword sovereign expert. His cultivation was comparable to his uncle 20 years ago. If the battle dragged on, he might even be able to suppress Makamanji. Heaven's Horizon, Ghost Wilderness, and Yuntian Palace. All the experts who entered the God Burial Ruins had died. Even if no one in the Alliance army recognized Qin Hao, at least Feng Junfei wouldn't forget him. After all, Feng Junfei was personally involved in the battle between the God Burial Plains. He knew all the laws and Dao intents that Qin Hao possessed. If Qin Hao really intercepted and killed Feng Junfei, even if he disguised himself, it was impossible for Feng Junfei to not recognize him. If that happened, would the War God Guard sit still? They would definitely take action again. From the War God Temple's actions, it was enough to determine that it wasn't Qin Hao's doing. In fact, Wuke had once considered that only Qin Hao had the qualifications to intercept and kill someone who was willing to take risks for Western Liang and challenge the War God Temple's prestige. After thinking about it again, Wuke immediately denied it. At this moment, Qin Dingtian's face was filled with disappointment. The illusion was destroyed again. Was his son really dead? All right. Don't harp on the past. Old people should look forward. How is Princess Bao? When is Island Lord Yun Ro going to send the little princess over to reunite with this old official? Zhan Guanghe's eyes were filled with excitement and couldn't wait. Master's daughter, the future little master of the Zhan clan. I wonder if the little master is cultivating the water wind step. The golden finger is too difficult and has high requirements for the girl. It's better not to cultivate it. Alchemy cannot be thrown away. However, Master's alchemy skills are too profound. This old official doesn't understand. Yes, it's time to make a trip to Western Liang and let the New Moon sect prepare. The New Moon sect has inherited the essence of Master's alchemy skills. The Zhan clan is more proficient in battle technique. I have decided to pass down the 9 heaven consecutive / to Princess Bao. Zhan Guanghe was talking to himself and couldn't extricate himself from it. This made the others feel extremely awkward. Shao Yi and Qin Dingtian looked at each other and had a helpless expression. Qin Hao and Dende had inherited their memories and Dao arts from their previous lives. To the Zhan clan, they were naturally the master. However, Shao Yi and Qin Dingtian wouldn't dare to take advantage of Zhan Guanghe. Forget it. Everyone's seniority wouldn't affect each other. That little girl Bao, I'm afraid she won't be able to reunite anytime soon. Wuck raised his head and sighed. This wasn't a small matter. The slightest mistake could lead to disaster. Bauer was Qin Hao's flesh and blood. The war god temple had a hold on her. How could she survive? Yun-Ro took a huge risk to look at the images sent over. She had already resolved everyone's thoughts and was very magnanimous. Speaking of which, it was actually better for Bao-Er to follow Island Lord Yun-Ro than them. Phoenix Flower Island could provide her with more cultivation resources, guidance, and protection. Over there, Qin Bao-Er's name was Yun Baobao. She was the daughter of the Emperor of True Self, Yun-Ro. Western Liang wasn't worthy of her unless Dendi was still alive. Chapter 1840. Translator, Transin Editor, Transin 9 Island Princess Divine Wilderness Calendar, Year 14015. It had been 20 years since the opening of the Burial God Ruins. In these 20 years, the 4 regions and 8 desolates had been in constant conflict, and the number of Emperor Dao experts had increased greatly. The 5 regions of the East Continent were no exception. However, among the 5 regions, the North region was relatively stable. Compared to the other 4 regions, it was very special. The stability of the North region had a lot to do with the territory. More than half of the territory was ruled by Phoenix Flower Island. Other than that, Ancient Ape Island was second. These 2 overlords could represent the entire North region. Ancient Ape Island was formed by powerful members of the Demon Clan, and they worshipped the ancient Golden Ape tribe. The Demon Clan and Phoenix Flower Island did not have a deep relationship, and both sides never caused trouble. Therefore, the North region was basically ruled by Phoenix Flower Island. No one in the North region dared to disobey the 9-island order. Phoenix Flower Island was very powerful, and its relationships were very complicated. It looked like a sect, but it was actually divided into 9 branches. Each of the 9 branches had a supreme island master, and each island ruled over Endless Sea City. Although there were interactions between the 9 branches, it was not frequent. Usually, the disciples of each branch would cultivate in their own training ground. Unless there was a major threat to the safety of the North region, the 9 island masters and disciples would not move around. Therefore, Phoenix Flower Island could be considered as the 9 sect. 100 Spirits Island. It was ranked 3rd among the Phoenix Flower 9 islands. Island Master Yun-Ro was a true self-great emperor. Endless Sea City was like a shining light that landed in a vast galaxy. Looking down from the sky, one would find that the shape of this sea region was like 100 spirits divine bird. At the head of the bird, there was an extremely vast giant island. The area was so vast that it was no less than the territory of the southern regions Northern Proud Empire and Southern Proud Empire after they merged. This island was the ancestral land of the 100 Spirits sect, 100 Spirits Island. At this moment, in the central area surrounded by countless cities, there was an extremely sacred peak. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, and the scenery was pleasant. It was like a fairyland that had fallen from the 9 heavens. On this Dao Peak there were countless beautiful young girls walking about. From afar, the immortal realm and the young girls formed a magnificent scene. It was like a top-grade immortal painting created by a great master, causing others to exclaim in admiration, desire, and envy. At the top of the Dao Peak, there was a dignified palace that exuded an oppressive aura like that of a deity. This was the Dao Palace of the 100 Spirits race, as well as the palace of the Island Master. At this moment, thousands of disciples of the 100 Spirit lineage were gathered in a magnificent dojo below the temple. Today was a grand occasion for the 100 Spirits Island. The 3 people with the greatest talent would represent the 100 Spirits Island in the Battle of the 9 Islands. In the end, the first person of the 9 islands would inherit the supreme divine item of the Phoenix Flower sect, the Dream Branch. The Dream Branch was a supreme emperor weapon. It was the divine soldier of the Phoenix Flower Sect's first-generation ancestor. Its power was boundless. The person who held the Dream Branch would be the leader of the 9 branches. In the future, they would be able to command the 9 branches' island masters and disciples. Its significance was extremely great. Therefore, the 100 Spirits tribe was actively preparing for war. They would select the 3 most talented disciples from the thousands of disciples to compete with the geniuses of the other 8 islands. They would win the Supreme Emperor weapon and become the young masters of the 9 tribes. At that moment, above the 100 Spirits dojo, dazzling lights of Taoist techniques flashed. Waves of terrifying Taoists were intertwined, and disciples were constantly being defeated. Bang! A beam of Tao light flew past, and another disciple was defeated. He fell to the ground with a sorrowful expression. Li Lufeng is the winner. On the platform, a white-haired old woman spoke. She exuded a powerful imperial lord aura, and her dignified eyes were filled with respect. On both sides of her sat many elders of the 100 Spirits tribe. Each of them had the aura of an emperor. It was a terrifying lineup. Senior Sister Lufeng is a 7th-level emperor. There is no doubt that she will enter the top 3. If it was me just now, I would have kowtowed and admitted defeat. Ha ha ha! A group of playful female disciples were discussing below the platform. They looked at the young lady who was walking down from the platform. Li Lufeng was extremely good-looking. Although she was not a disciple of the Island Master, she was still a direct disciple of the Great Elder. There was no need to doubt her strength. Among the thousands of people here, no one can shake Senior Sister Lufeng's position. It's a pity that we can only aim for the 4th place and below. We will try our best to obtain higher-grade cultivation techniques and elixirs from the elders. Why? Could it be that you are still thinking about the 1st and 2nd place? Nonsense. I wouldn't dare. Ha ha! In the words of the elders, our role is to participate. The group of young girls chatted and laughed without the slightest scruple. Occasionally, some of them would cast their gazes towards 2 directions extremely far away from the platform. There were 2 figures seated there, and both of them possessed extraordinary bearings. The one in the east was wearing a white dress. She looked like a goddess and her facial features were perfect. Any girl who saw her would feel inferior in front of her. Yunbao was the daughter of the Island Master. Among the disciples of the 100 Spirits faction, no one could be compared to her in terms of status and identity. It was said that 20 years ago, Senior Sister Bauer was the little princess in the eyes of the 9 island masters of the Phoenix Flower faction. All the elders doted on her excessively. She was once thought to be the next Phoenix Flower goddess and the owner of the Dream Branches. As for the other person in the west of the platform, she was wearing a green dress. Her name was Zhu Xing. She was also an extraordinary person. She was the direct disciple of the Island Master Yun Ro 15 years ago, and was extremely talented. In the 100 Spirits faction, other than Senior Sister Bauer, no one could suppress her. Of course, that was only her status. If she was not the daughter of the Island Master, no one would know how talented she was. However, many disciples thought that Yun Bao's talent was more outstanding. The older senior sisters said that her background was very complicated. She did not seem to be the daughter of the Island Master and her surname was not Yun. However, no one dared to talk about this in depth. They did not dare to talk about it in private either. It was a taboo and disrespectful to the Island Master. If they did not do so, the consequences would be very serious. The other female disciples did not dare to hope for the first and second candidates of the 100 Spirits faction in the 9 Paths sparring competition. If there were no surprises, it would definitely be Yun Bao and Zhu Xing. However, the disciples were looking forward to seeing who would be the first in the 100 Spirits faction. On the platform, the battles were extremely intense and were still going on. The battles on each platform progressed very quickly. In the end, the top 10 were decided. However, these were the top 10 of the 100 Spirits faction. Not all of them could participate in the 9 Islands sparring competition. Only 3 could be sent out. As expected, Li Lufeng successfully came in third and was qualified to participate in the competition. The disciples below the 4th place also received rewards from the elders. Lufeng. On the platform, the old woman who had proved her way sovereign called out, "I am here." Li Lufeng took a step forward and was very respectful. The person who had spoken was his master. "Bao'er Zhu Xing," the great elder said. He looked at the east and west side. This scene shocked all the disciples. Indeed, there was no need to participate in the battle. The 1st and 2nd place had already been decided. No one was dissatisfied with this. Even if Yun Bao, and Zhu Xing went up on the platform to fight, no one would be able to stop them. "Great Elder!" Yun Bao and Zhu Xing stood up and walked over to stand beside Li Lufeng. "The 3 of you will be the candidates of the 100 Spirits faction. Although the 1st island, Feng Hua, is the leader of the 9 islands, the disciples of the 9 islands have a chance to get the Dream Branch. In the end, only the strongest one will get it. You must fight hard for it," the great elder said. "We will do our best." Yun Bao, Zhu Xing, and Li Lufeng shouted at the same time. The great elder nodded, and his gaze landed on Yun Bao and Zhu Xing. He smiled and said, "Bao Zhu Xing, the 2 of you are the most talented in the 100 Spirits lineage. Both of you have cultivated with the Island Lord and have received the Island Lord's teachings. Your junior sisters will not have any objections to the 9 Islands sparring competition deciding on the 2 of you. However, whether it is me, the elders, or the disciples, we all want to see who will be the strongest in the 100 Spirits lineage. 3 days later, you will see me in 3 days." "Yes, great elder. I will not disappoint my master. I will get the Dream Branch for the 100 Spirits faction," Zhu Xing replied. Her calm eyes contained incomparable confidence. Yun Bao glanced at Zhu Xing. Was this considered the strongest in the 100 Spirits faction? "You have to get past me first," Bao said directly. "Senior sister, don't cry in front of all the junior sisters in 3 days. Otherwise, my master will think that I am bullying you," Zhu Xing said calmly. Her words were sharp. "Me? Cry? Ha ha." Yun Bao put her hands on her waist and raised her head, which was half a head taller than Zhu Xing. "I am your big sister Bao. Just you wait." Okay. "Big sister Bao, let's see how arrogant you can be then," Zhu Xing said angrily. "Zhu Xing, come to me." The Island Lord's voice came from the majestic hall from afar. Zhu Xing's expression immediately became much more serious. She turned into a long rainbow and flew towards the hall. Yun Bao frowned slightly as she looked at Zhu Xing's back. Her smile gradually disappeared and her expression darkened. "Stupid girl, you still want to ride on my head. I will beat you up the same way I beat you back then." Yun Bao proudly stroked the tip of her nose with her thumb. Her gaze followed Zhu Xing to the door of the hall. She secretly guessed that her mother had called her junior sister over to do something shady. Was she going to hide something again? This made Bao a little wary. It seemed that she could not be careless in the battle in 3 days. After the martial arts competition ended, the elders and disciples in the hall gradually dispersed. The 3 contestants of the 100 Spirits sect had been decided. However, before that, everyone was looking forward to the battle between Yun Bao and Zhu Xing. They wanted to see who would be the real number 1 of the 100 Spirits sect. Yun Bao had a noble status and was once the princess of the 9 islands. However, that was a long time ago. Perhaps the 9 island lords thought that she was cute and took good care of her because of Island Lord Yunro. Now, the juniors of the various islands had grown up. In the past 20 years, many geniuses had emerged from the 9 branches. The other 8 island lords naturally focused on nurturing their own disciples. They could not continue to pamper Yun Bao. This could be seen from the 100 Spirits sect. Island Lord Yunro focused on nurturing Zhu Sheng and did not put all her energy on Yun Bao. The little princess of the 9 islands was a thing of the past. Talent was the most important thing in the wind and flower 9 branches. If one's ability was outstanding enough, then the person who picked the dream branch would become the princess of the 9 islands today. Yun Bao would eventually be replaced. Chapter 1841. Yun Bao looked at the main hall. 15 years ago, she had also lived there. Now, like the other disciples, she lived in the disciples' area below the main hall. Although Bao Er's residence was still very close to the main hall, she could no longer enter or leave as she pleased unless she was summoned by the island lord. Otherwise, she could only look up. She's not my biological daughter after all. Yun Bao Er's eyes were filled with a faint bitterness. At this moment, a silhouette involuntarily appeared in her mind. Although the silhouette was already very blurry, she had always remembered the aura emitted by the silhouette. That person in her mind was her biological mother. She let out a long sigh. Her mood instantly became somewhat depressed. Bao knew that Yun Ro had accepted Zhu Sheng as her disciple to create pressure for her, encouraging her to cultivate and grow. However, she still felt somewhat uncomfortable. Could it be that if she did not work hard enough, she could not be the island lord's daughter? If she did not have the ability, she would have to submit to others. This logic would definitely not hold true in front of her biological mother. After taking a deep look at the main hall, Bao turned into a beam of light and left the Dao Peak. She tore open the space and escaped into the void. Soon, she teleported away from 100 Spirits Island. At the same time, just as her aura appeared in the sea, she saw a deafening roar of a dragon whale under the vast North Sea. The waves churned as a massive creature emerged from the bottom of the sea. It emitted an extremely terrifying demonic aura. Yun Bao Er's tall figure descended and stepped onto the dragon whale's back. The woman and the beast headed towards the distant sea. The massive whale swam towards the deep sea. Its dense and shining dragon scales were sturdy and eye-catching. 9 halos surrounded the dragon whale's body. Wherever it passed, thousands of sea beasts in the deep sea fled in panic. 20 years ago, this ancient dragon whale was captured by Yun Ro in the East Sea and given to Bao as a mount. With Yun Ro's powerful Dao rules binding it, Bao effortlessly absorbed a wisp of the dragon whale's soul. Their consciousness was connected and she could use it as she wished. 20 years later, the dragon whale had become an emperor and Bao had grown up. During this period, it had attempted to escape 100 Spirits Island more than once, but every time it tried, it would end up in a tragic state. That was until 10 years ago when it secretly saw Yun Bao crying alone. Her sobbing sounded like the whimper of a lonely whale. It had no other species. Back then, it had touched the dragon whale's soul. How could it not be lonely? It was the only dragon whale in the vast divine wilderness. He had no family and no one to confide in. He had to bear all the joys and sorrows by himself. It was also on that day that the dragon whale no longer had any thoughts of leaving 100 Spirits Island. It felt that it needed to protect this child. 20 years had passed. Now, the little girl had grown up to be as beautiful as a fairy from the 9th heaven. Although Long Jing and Bao didn't talk much in his heart, he had already taken her as his child. As long as Bao didn't cry helplessly like that day, as long as she didn't feel wronged, he could give her anything, including his life. For the dragon whale, its mission changed from being a slave to simply wanting to accompany this lonely little soul. Hua! Beautiful water splashed into the sky as the dragon whale leaped thousands of feet. It was like a divine dragon soaring in the sky. Its speed was extremely fast. Looking down from Bao position, the countless prosperous sea cities under the 100 Spirits Islands jurisdiction flew past them. Eventually, the dragon whale brought Bao to a desolate place. This was an extremely remote area in the deep sea. The surroundings were shrouded in endless sea fog, as if it was a restriction set up by an expert. Vaguely, one could see the outline of an isolated island in the fog. It gave off an extremely dangerous aura and seemed especially mysterious. In the past 10 years, Bao had often come here. Hence, the dragon whale was very familiar with this path. You can go back. Bao-er's toes lightly tapped on the dragon whale's sturdy back. Her body floated up and flew towards the extremely dense sea fog. The dragon whale didn't say anything. It turned around and returned to the 100 Spirits Island. The sea fog was condensed by an extremely profound emperor technique. Even a Tao-confirming emperor like it couldn't break through it. Although it didn't know what was inside, Bao had been here countless times and had always returned safely. Hence, it wasn't worried about Bao-er's safety. At this moment, Bao-er entered the sea fog. Ordinary people couldn't see anything within 1 meter of her. Furthermore, the sea fog contained extremely terrifying Emperor Tao regulations. Even the dragon whale didn't dare to break through it. One could imagine that if ordinary people were to enter it, they would basically die. However, all of this didn't affect Bao. Red flames gradually appeared in her beautiful eyes. Her eyeballs were filled with traces of flame patterns. Wherever she looked, she seemed to be able to see through all illusions. It was easy for her to see through the loopholes in the sea fog. She easily passed through this layer of obstruction and arrived at a deserted island. The sea fog that shrouded them had disappeared. The sky here was especially clear, and the air was especially fresh. A thick medicinal fragrance wafted over from the deserted island in front of them. Smelling it was especially refreshing, and it could calm one's heart. Bao-er stepped onto the deserted island. From afar, the deserted island didn't look like anything special. However, when she was on the island, it was a completely different scenery. The layout here wasn't very grand. It was far from the majestic and beautiful scenery of the 100 Spirits Island. However, it gave off a refreshing and natural feeling. Living here was especially comfortable, like living in a small farmhouse. Along the way, she teased the cute little beasts on the island. Bao-er followed the winding path filled with medicinal herbs and arrived at a small courtyard with bamboo fences. In the courtyard, there was an especially burly middle-aged man with slightly dark skin. He wore a simple green robe and carried a bucket. The ladle in his hand was leisurely watering his medicinal herbs. His movements were very careful and very gentle. It could be seen that he was very attentive to the medicinal herbs. Uncle Han. Seeing this middle-aged man, Bao-er's depressed mood became much better. She smiled and quickly walked into the courtyard. This middle-aged man actually didn't know anything about pharmacology, let alone alchemy. Bao-er once asked him why he planted so many medicinal herbs. He replied, for someone else. A person who didn't know anything about pharmacology or alchemy, but planted medicinal herbs all over the mountain. How stupid could he be? Therefore, that day Bao laughed and called him Uncle Han. She never changed the way she addressed him. Eyebrows furrowed, face full of resentment. Who made you unhappy? Zhan Wu didn't raise his head. He spoke softly as he watered the medicinal herbs. His voice was deep and powerful. Outsiders could tell at a glance that he was an extremely powerful cultivator. Can't we have a good chat? Bao-er's smile froze. She stopped walking and stomped her feet. She came to relax, but this uncle was like a roundworm in her stomach. He saw through her at a glance. You're unhappy is written all over your face. I can't pretend not to see it. Zhan Wu stopped what he was doing and sat on the stone bench in the courtyard with a smile. He poured 2 cups of tea. That's true. Who asked you to be so stupid? Bao-er walked over quickly and sat down. She picked up the teacup and drank it in one gulp. Good. Fill my cup. Zhan Wu shook his head and smiled. He poured another cup and said, Tell me what's going on. You're angry. Bao-er pouted and thought for a while. She automatically filtered out Zhu Xing and said, "The 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect will discuss martial arts to decide who the Dream Branch belongs to." Dream Branch. Zhan Wu's expression turned serious. The divine soldier of the first ancestor of the Phoenix Flower sect. This is to choose the next goddess for the 9 branches. The sunset battle god that everyone in the 5 realms of the East continent feared naturally knew the origin of the Phoenix Flower sect. This first ancestor was also the strongest person in the history of the 9 branches. It was said that he had comprehended a wisp of divine intent. Unfortunately, he did not take that step in the end. If not, he would be the second god-level expert in the divine wilderness after the martial lord. One could imagine how powerful the weapon of such a person was. The Dream Branch was extremely important to the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect. No wonder Bao looked worried. She must be under a lot of pressure. Why? Are you not confident? Zhan Wu said. Yun Ro adopted Bao so the young mistress of the 100 Spirits sect was naturally the first to bear the brunt. The third island had probably placed all its hopes on Bao but it would not be easy to get the Dream Branch. How can a mere Mengji not have confidence? Who do you think I am? Bao did not care at all. It was as if she was already in the bag. But in her heart there was indeed pressure. The 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect. The second island, Azure. The third island, 100 Spirit. The fourth island, Brushing Teeth. The fifth island, Crimson Pearl. The sixth island, Wu Huang. The seventh island, Bright Light. The 8th island, Golden Dew. The 9th island, Peach Life. Among the 9 branches, the first island had always been led by the Phoenix Flower sect. That was the ancestral land of the sect. However, there were many geniuses in the 9 branches. Not to mention Zhu Xing, the chief disciple of the first and second islands, Di Dao, was very strong. The 6th island was not weak either. The chief disciple of the 8th island, Golden Dew, was the most mysterious. Until now, no one knew who he was. Even Bao did not have the confidence to win. In this battle, there were many monstrous geniuses, and each of them was the most talented in the North Territory. No chief disciple of the 9 branches dared to admit that they were the best in the Phoenix Flower sect. Have you ever slacked off on the cultivation technique I taught you? Zhan Wu asked. I have been practicing it. Bao held her chin. Her eyes were unfocused as if her soul was not here. With my cultivation technique, I am invincible in the world. Even Dendi, who defeated Lei Feng 600 years ago, may not be able to defeat me. Ha! Zhan Wu laughed proudly. At this moment, there was an obvious change in Bao's expression. Her body trembled slightly, but she quickly recovered. Braggart! Zhan Wu noticed the change in Bao and sighed in his heart. What happened back then must have had a heavy impact on her. He said, I have never lied. In this life, I have only told one lie to the world. You will know my character sooner or later. Believe me, Mengji belongs to you. However, don't reveal the cultivation technique I taught you to others unless you have no other choice. So mysterious. Are all strong cultivators like this? Don't tell me that you are also full of blood debts and that the 5 realms are your enemies. Bao was tired of these stories, but there was one thing she had to admit. The honest uncle was indeed very strong, so strong that it was a little scary. Her senses were never wrong. Even Yun Ro might not be a match for the honest uncle. However, she did not know the honest uncle's background. But it did not matter. She never asked about the background of her friends. As long as they had the right temperament, it was fine. Girl, you must remember uncle's words in your heart. Okay. Stop nagging. I'm leaving. Wait. Zhan Wu's expression became extremely serious. He said, Today, I will teach you another cultivation technique. You must practice it well. As for the previous ones, you don't have to pay attention to them. Trump card? Bao Er's bright eyes glowed as she stared at Zhan Wu with a smile. The honest uncle had prepared a killing move for her. This way, she would have a higher chance of obtaining Mingji. It's just an ordinary cultivation technique. Girl, pay attention. Zhan Wu's eyes became serious. His temperament suddenly changed at this moment. An incomparably terrifying emperor's aura spread out. Suddenly, the world lost its color. A tyrannical divine sense entered Bao Er's forehead. Bao Er's expression became more and more unsightly. She slowly said with difficulty, "It's a thunder technique." Chapter 1842. Her divine will flowed into her sea of consciousness, forming a string of mysterious runes that fell slowly, containing extremely powerful thunder Dao power. In an instant, lightning flashed in her mind, and Bao Er's divine will was occupied by the terrifying thunder power. This technique was extremely powerful and was definitely at the emperor level, and it was of an extremely high level. If it were someone else, they would probably dream of obtaining this technique. However, Bao Er was not happy. The Thunder Dao was a powerful attack technique, and it was ferocious. Women rarely cultivated the Thunder Dao. Even if they did, most of them had a bloodline related to thunder, which was passed down in their family. No matter how good the technique was, it depended on the person. If Bao Er did not have the Thunder Soul and Thunder Body, it would be a waste of time for her to cultivate the Thunder Dao. Even if she cultivated it to a certain level in the future, the power she could unleash would not be as strong as a martial artist with the Thunder Soul. "I refuse," Bao Er said. It was fine if she had the Thunder Soul and could cultivate it, but she did not. "If Uncle wants you to cultivate it, Zhan Wu said. "No." "Really?" "No." "Okay. I'll seal the island and cultivate in seclusion." Zhan Wu got up. "Don't." Bao Er was anxious and grabbed Zhan Wu's arm. "If you seal the island and cultivate in seclusion, who can I talk to later?" Emperors cultivated in seclusion for at least 10 years, and some could even last for hundreds of years. "Do you want to cultivate it or not?" Zhan Wu smiled. "Forcing an ignorant girl is very bad. Can't I cultivate it?" Bao Er said, feeling wronged. It might not be a bad thing to learn more. Moreover, Uncle Zhan Wu should have his reasons. He would not impart the technique to her randomly. "Okay, cultivate immediately. Don't rest tonight. Go back tomorrow morning and I will watch you cultivate." Zhan Wu sat back in his seat and supervised her. Bao Er's face turned even uglier. She gritted her teeth. "You win." After speaking, she sat down cross-legged and focused. Soon, she entered the state of cultivation and began to cultivate the Thunder Dao. Zhan Wu's gaze landed on Bao Er, and he saw that her body was gradually glowing with lightning. Traces of lightning energy circulated around her body, and her aura grew increasingly stronger. Zhan Wu nodded his head, silently musing, as expected of Qin Hao's daughter, her talent is without a doubt. Regardless of whether it was the cultivation method he had taught her in the past or the lightning art today, Bao Er's learning speed and state of mind were extremely fast. However, the battle martial immortal did not impart Qin Hao's absolute arts to her, such as the fleeting steps, fleeting sword chi, etc. Although the Sunset Battle Immortal also had a deep understanding of the Pill Emperor's absolute arts, he did not teach her. If he learned Qin Hao's secret technique, it would bring a lot of trouble to Bao Er. It would only add to his troubles. It was not suitable for him to learn it now, but he was not in a hurry to inherit his father's legacy. There was plenty of time in the future. After much consideration, Zhan Wu finally imparted the honest battle scripture to Bao. This ultimate technique that stimulated one's fighting spirit was also the Sunset Battle God's strongest trump card. Zhan 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 of Zhan Zhan Zhan. Moreover, Bao Er's physique and personality were very compatible with the honest combat scripture. This girl was born with brute force. Once she unleashed her battle intent, she was like a little monster in the human world. Even Zhan Wu was frightened by her. As for the thunder art, Zhan Wu naturally wanted to refine Bao Er's physique. In order to condense the soul power of the divine thunder art, he needed to cast the acquired thunder body. Only then could he reduce the pain and risk of the soul-forming process and let Bao Er suffer less. Of the 9 elements of desolation, Dendi had obtained 8 of them. As for the remaining heaven-controlling thunder, Qin Hao would never have dreamed that it would be in Zhan Wu's hands. For the entire night, Bao Er was immersed in cultivation. Her talent was extremely high, and she quickly mastered it. She used the thunder technique to temper her body. Thunder of the great path rumbled on the deserted island, and its momentum was terrifying. The next day, Bao Er left this place and entered the sea fog, returning to 100 Spirits Island. Before he left, Zhan Wu solemnly told him to come back before the 9-island debate to give her a surprise. During this period, he could not slack off on cultivating the lightning Dao. Bao Er had to promise him 3 times before she was willing to let him go. Stinky bastard, simple-minded fool. Above the North Sea, Bao Er flew through the air. After a night of tempering her body with the lightning Dao, her bones were sore. At this moment, when she opened her mouth to speak, there was the taste of thunder. It felt like lightning was leaping out of her mouth. Although Bao Er scolded him, she was also curious. Why did the simple-minded man force her to cultivate the lightning Dao? She could not figure it out no matter how hard she racked her brains. She would probably have to wait until the day of the 9-island debate to find out the answer. She chuckled. Speaking of which, she had some fate with this simple-minded man. The North Territory was so big, but she had to accidentally barge into that deserted island. On that day, it was as if the deserted island had appeared in front of her. It felt a little strange. Her younger sister was extremely talented, and no one in this generation of the divine wilderness could compare to her. After Bao Er left, the sea fog dissipated, and the deserted island also disappeared from the North Sea. However, at this moment, 2 figures stood on the island, looking in the direction Bao Er left with doting gazes. One of them was Zhan Lu, who had swept through the God Burial Valley 20 years ago, causing the emperors of the 4 regions to be frightened out of their wits. He had even personally killed Dendi. If Bao Er was still here, she would definitely fight Zhan Lu without any regard for her life. After all, he was the enemy who had killed her parents. Have you investigated the information of the Phoenix Flower 9 Branches disciples? Zhan Wu's voice was cold, and his face was incomparably dignified. Bao Er had just left, and the simple-minded man had transformed into the sunset battle god, the strongest expert of the continent. After investigating, she felt a lot of pressure. Zhan Lu respectfully handed over a piece of information. Zhan Wu glanced through it and raised his eyebrows slightly. Then, he relaxed, a Dao confirming extreme. The information detailed the names, realms, and Emperor Dao laws of the Phoenix Flower 9 Branches chief disciples. In one night, the War God Temple had investigated everything. Even Bao Er herself did not know. The information of the 8th Island's chief disciple, Golden Dew, who was known as the most mysterious Phoenix Flower 9 Branches chief disciple, was also laid bare on this piece of paper. 9 chief disciples, 2 chief disciples, and 3 chief disciples. They were all emperors. Among them, there were 3 who had reached the emperor realm. One could imagine how powerful the Phoenix Flower sect was in the North Territory. This was just the disciples, not to mention the elders of the various branches and the 9 island masters. This huge force, except for the War God Temple and Daqin, basically no one in the East Continent could suppress it. Bao Er was a 7th-tier Dao confirming extreme. With her ability, she might be able to fight against an Emperor Lord. However, the chief disciple of the Phoenix Flower sect was a Dao confirming extreme. She would be the strongest obstacle to her. Zhan Lu said. Zhan Wu nodded. There was no suspense in the battle between a 7th-tier Dao confirming extreme. The gap between the two sides was too big, and it was not something talent could make up for. However, I guess this chief disciple will not fight. She is too old. She is in the same batch as the 8th and 9th Island Masters. Because she is a disciple of the first Island Master, her seniority is a little lower. If she fights, it will be unfair to the other 8 islands. The 8 Island Masters of the Phoenix Flower sect will definitely not agree. Therefore, Bauer's opponents are the second chief disciple of the Phoenix Flower sect, the chief disciple of the second island, Dark Blue, and the most mysterious chief disciple of the 8th island, Golden Dew. Jean-Loup analyzed. These 3 are all Emperor Lords. Their cultivation is very strong, and they have the best chance to seize the Dream Branch. If the Tao-confirming extreme doesn't come out, the rest are trash. It doesn't matter. Bauer has the Royal Thunder Soul and the Red Lotus Tyrannical Fire. It is enough to make these 3 Emperor Lords doubt their lives and lose their cultivation direction. Zhan Wu directly concluded that if Denda's daughter couldn't defeat a mere Emperor Lord, she was definitely not Qin Hao's biological daughter. Well, then I will go and prepare the soul-protecting Emperor weapon, Jean-Loup said with a smile. Since his adoptive father had made the conclusion, this battle was a foregone conclusion. Next, I should find a few magic weapons for Bauer to prepare for condensing her soul to prevent any accidents. If Uncle Mu makes it himself, I will be worried. Zhan Wu said. Yes, adoptive father. Jean-Loup's body flashed and disappeared directly from the spot. Immediately, Zhan Wu let out a long sigh of relief. In order to let Bauer seize the Dream Branch, the dignified Sunset Battle Immortal was really exhausted. It was more stressful than fighting with Wu Xia. He would rather shoot 2 more Emperor Yu Jing of the Flowing Island to death. It would be better if Qin Hao was here. That guy had a soul-condensing divine weapon. If Qin Hao helped Bauer shape her soul, it would definitely be easier and less painful. After all, he was an alchemist. He really hoped that the day of everyone's reunion would come sooner. Chapter 1843. 2 days later, Bauer and Zhu Xing battled. Bauer was still very confident in this battle. First of all, she was superior to Zhu Xing in terms of cultivation level. She knew all about Zhu Xing's talent and emperor technique. Of course, Zhu Xing was also aware of Bauer's talent and ability. The only thing she needed to be careful of was that Yun Ro had privately summoned Zhu Xing. She must have given her some powerful artifact. Soon, 2 days passed. On this day, the elders and disciples gathered at the 100 Spirits Temple. The ceremony was extremely solemn. Everyone was looking forward to this battle. The arena was still presided over by the Grand Elder. What do you think of this battle? An elder asked with a smile. Both of them have cultivated with the Island Lord and are proficient in the same emperor techniques. However, one is in the 6th tier of Tao validation, while the other is in the 7th tier. Bauer has a better chance of winning. Someone expressed his opinion. The others nodded. Even if they cultivated the same emperor techniques, Bauer grew up in the 100 Spirits Island. On the other hand, Zhu Xing had only been in the sect for 10 years. Her foundation in emperor techniques was definitely not as deep as Bauer's. Moreover, the elders had watched Bauer grow up and naturally hoped that she would win. Everyone believed that only Bauer could shoulder the pride of the 100 Spirits sect. However, this battle was definitely not as simple as it seemed. The Island Lord would definitely create some restrictions and trouble for Bauer. Therefore, even if she won, it would not be easy. Tell me, which of the 2 senior sisters will become the lead disciple? Is there a need to ask? It will definitely be senior sister Bauer. The elders have privately said that senior sister Bauer's talent is rare. No matter what she learns, she can use it easily. However, I heard from the senior sisters that the Island Lord seems to have bestowed a powerful emperor technique to senior sister Zhu Xing. The Emperor weapon is to make up for the difference in cultivation level between the two. However, some differences cannot be made up for by Emperor weapons. This is a little worrying. The disciples were also discussing. Like the elders, they unanimously believed that Bao Er had a higher chance of winning. However, if she wanted to defeat Zhu Xing, she would probably have to pay a price. Bao Er Zhu Xing. The great elder floated in the air above the training ground, the sovereign lord's light shining around her. Her aura contained a shocking pressure. She looked at the two people on the training ground and said, "This battle will decide who the first seat of Bai Ling will be. You two must not hold back. You must give it your all." Bao Er and Zhu Xing stood at the two ends of the training hall and looked at each other. They nodded at the same time. In the Phoenix Flower 9 Veins martial competition, the lead disciples of the various islands would not care what realm the opponent was at. There was also no such thing as suppressing one's cultivation. Everyone would use their full strength to fight. Otherwise, it would be a blasphemy to the Dream Branch. Therefore, Bao Er and Zhu Xing would not show mercy. In this battle, both of you should give it your all. However, during the battle, Bao Er is not allowed to use any of the other 8 lineages. Great Elder said seriously, establishing a rule. Yun Bao Er was born in the 100 Spirit Island and grew up in the 9 Veins of the Phoenix Flower Island. She had dabbled in the martial arts of all the islands and was proficient in the 9 Veins of the Phoenix Flower Island. To Zhu Xing, this was very dangerous. Since the 100 Spirit Island had decided on the position of chief disciple, they would use the 100 Spirit Island's martial arts to determine their martial arts. "Master, this is unfair to junior sister Bao Er." Li Lufeng stood out and said. She was 10 years older than Bao Er and was the eldest senior sister of Bai Ling. Since it was the 9 Veins martial competition, both Bao Er and Zhu Xing would face the other 8 lineages' ultimate arts in the 9 Islands arena. Why was Bao Er not allowed to use any of them today? Restriction. Obviously, it was restricting Bao Er from using her full strength. Island Lord's will, do you have any objections? Great Elder said unhappily and stared at Li Lufeng. She had no reason to stick her head out. "No, I have no objections." Li Lufeng's body trembled. She secretly looked at Bao Er and then retreated. At this moment, Bao Er looked at the Bai Ling Hall above the training ground and scanned back and forth. However, she did not see Yunro. She smiled helplessly and said, "It's okay. If I'm not allowed to use it, then I won't. If I use the 9 Veins Emperor's art to suppress Zhu Xing, it will seem like I'm bullying her." The Great Elder did not know what to say. In fact, Bao Er could use the 9 Veins Emperor's art as she wished. The Island Lord's actions were indeed biased towards Zhu Xing. "Great Elder, does that mean that I can use any cultivation technique other than the Windflower Emperor's art?" Bao Er raised her head and asked. "This." The Great Elder was stunned. The Island Lord did not say how to reply. "Permitted." At this moment, a dignified voice sounded from the Bai Ling Hall. "Permitted." The Great Elder repeated and heaved a sigh of relief. "Then let's begin. Junior sister, you have to be careful." Bao Er rubbed her fist and looked at Zhu Xing. In fact, among all the cultivation techniques, she did not seriously cultivate the cultivation techniques of the other 7 islands except for the first Phoenix Flower Island. Even so, she was very familiar with the cultivation techniques of the other 7 islands. However, other than the 100 Spirit Flower plucking hand, Bao Er's most powerful technique was the martial arts taught by the simple-minded uncle. Therefore, this restriction did not affect her too much. "The person who should be careful is you, senior sister. I have a Dharma treasure given to me by Master. You have nothing." Zhu Xing said confidently and did not hide her trump card at all. "Come, let me give you some guidance today. If you lose, don't say that I'm a level higher than you." Bao Er got into a fighting stance and the 7 Emperor's rings slowly appeared under her feet. In an instant, the training hall erupted with a brilliant emperor's light and many flower petals fell from the void. Whether you win or lose, you're a level higher than me anyway. If you lose, you'll lose even more face, Zhu Xing said. The emperor's rings bloomed and 6 halos appeared under her feet. Endless flower petals fell from the sky and bathed her body. The flower celestial art was a cultivation technique that the disciples of the 9 veins cultivated together. It was the general outline of the phoenix flower sect's cultivation techniques and the foundation of the sect. Chapter 1844. The flower deity formula was profound and all-encompassing. Many of the ultimate techniques of the 9 veins of the phoenix flower were derived from the flower deity formula. For example, the 100 spirits veins flower picking hand was fierce and overbearing. Another example was the phoenix cloud swordplay of the phoenix flower veins, the head of the 9 islands. The 9 veins innovated from the foundation of the flower deity formula, taking one of its essences to create an ultimate technique of the island. It was enough to show the profundity and power of this technique. The flower deity formula was the cornerstone of the 9 veins cultivation. The depth of the technique often determined the strength of the realm. This was similar to the indestructible samsara technique. When the technique was perfected, it could increase the cultivation of the martial artist by 1 cycle. At this time, Bao and Zhu Xing were both using the flower deity formula. Both of them were glowing and bathed in the endless light of the flowers. Their temperaments changed drastically. They were like 2 fairies from the 9 heavens, beautiful and divine. Waves of emperor qi flowed from the imperial ring beneath Zhu Xing. She stretched out her palm and slashed across the air. In the air, a formless claw force suddenly moved forward and grabbed Bao's vitals. It was ferocious and overbearing. Bao attacked at the same time. Dilly's winding body raised its slender hand and the 100 spirits flower picking hand smashed forward. A scream came from the training hall. A ball of intense light exploded and dissipated in the center. It was deafening. Zhu Xing walked forward, her palms turning illusory as waves of terrifying claw force flew out crazily. Dense sounds of breaking through the air could be heard from the training hall. The expressions of the disciples changed. In just a short moment, they did not know how many attacks Zhu Xing had unleashed. Her use of the flower plucking hand to such an extent was something that none of the thousands of disciples in Bailing could match. Even Li Lufeng could not do what she did. Junior sister, it's too flashy. Bao was calm. She smiled and slowly raised her palm above her head. Whoosh! A strong light blade slashed out from her palm. It was extremely sharp. The space was cut in half. Countless sparks exploded on the light blade, but it could not slow it down. It slashed directly in front of Zhu Xing. Zhu Xing's eyes narrowed. She had launched so many attacks. Were they all destroyed? A strong sense of danger came. Zhu Xing's heart seemed to be suffocating. She faced the light blade and did not dodge. Her hands smashed forward, and her body erupted with a violent emperor's light. Everyone saw 2 dazzling claw-shaped lights fly out of her hands, trying to crush the light blade. Instant, Bao said calmly. The speed of the light blade suddenly increased, causing people to be unable to react in time. It turned into a ray of light that deviated slightly, passing through the 2 claw-like light claws and slashing at Zhu Xing's head. Zhu Xing's expression changed as he raised his hands and grabbed at the sky. Intense emperor light surged from his palms. Bang! A heavy blow was heard. Zhu Xing staggered a few steps back and let out a muffled groan. At the same time, the 2 claws that failed to stop the light blade also reached Bao's throat. However, the claws were repelled by Bao's protective barrier. Zhu Xing is at a disadvantage if he doesn't use the laws of emperor intent and only relies on his Dao validation realm. Not only that, Bao's usage and understanding of the flower picking hand also exceeded Zhu Xing's expectations. She could clearly determine where the opponent's attack would land, and thus control the attack to skillfully avoid it. She could predict the enemy's movements and figure out the enemy's psychology. On the contrary, Zhu Xing is lacking in this aspect. The elders commented. Bao Er's control over the situation was very strong, but this was not because of her battle experience. After all, Bao Er had never experienced real life and death battles in the outside world with other sects. This was her innate awareness of the strong. Boom! A wave of Emperor spirit power erupted from the field. Around Zhu Xing's body, endless green Dao will radiance rolled and spread, and a bamboo forest appeared. Looking from the spectator's stand, half of the field was covered by the bamboo forest, and it was filled with extremely powerful Dao will of life. Bao Er had the advantage in fighting Dili. If Zhu Xing wanted to win this battle, she had to start with the laws of Dao will. Just now, for the sake of fighting spirit, she fought with Bao Er head-on and ended up at a disadvantage. Go. Zhu Xing's Dao validation emperor intent emanated from her body. As her voice fell, the bamboos that grew out of thin air behind her rose from the ground like sharp thorns, covering the sky and the sun. They all fell towards Bao Er's position. Oh, the rules! Bao Er smiled and stepped forward quickly. Even if she did not inherit her father's supreme technique, the divine steps, her speed was so fast that no one could catch her. She brought out a blurry afterimage in the field. Swoosh! 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 Countless sharp bamboos fell. Bao Er dodged left and right, dodging every single one of them. She was like a female assassin shuttling through the bamboo forest, madly closing in on Zhu Xing. The distance between the two kept shrinking. Is senior sister's zodiac a rabbit? Zhu Xing's laws of Dao will could not keep up with Bao Er's speed. At this moment, she pointed her finger forward. Suddenly, countless terrifying vines rolled out from the green training ground and wrapped around Bao Er's legs and body, trapping her in the middle. Bao Er's figure suddenly froze. She realized that she had been tied up. At this moment, dense sounds of killing came from above her head again. Looking up, the sky above the training ground was covered by bamboo thorns, turning into a boundless green ocean. Break! Bao Er shouted. The Emperor's spirit in her body exploded. A layer of blood-red flames spread out wildly. The vines that wrapped around her legs, arms, and body were all burned to ashes. She stepped on the training ground and soared into the sky like the sun rising from the east. Her body was covered in raging flames, and it was extremely spectacular. At this moment, the terrifying flames dispersed the green sky. Every time Bao Er's position rose, the sky above the training ground would become even redder. It was like a burning sea of fire was invading everything. The bamboo thorns were still falling. However, when they came into contact with Bao Er's protective flames, they were all melted and incinerated. Zhu Xing's laws of Dao will could not hurt her at all. This made Zhu Xing's expression gradually turn ugly. Boom! The terrifying flames blasted down. Bao Er punched out, and the demonic flames in the sky rolled. It was like a river of lava pouring into the training ground. The bamboo forest was incinerated and turned into nothingness. The fire crazily swallowed forward, wanting to bury Zhu Xing in it. Sister Bao Er is so strong. She's just like a monster. The difference between Dili, a 6th-tier Dao proving realm cultivator, and a 7th-tier Dao proving realm cultivator, is actually negligible. Countless female disciples below the training ground looked fearful and retreated. Although they were far away from the training ground, the scorching aura of the demonic flames made them feel extremely uncomfortable. No one wanted to fight against Bao Er in this life. At this moment, Bao Er's fist blasted down, almost incinerating the bamboo forest. Then, she used the 100-spirit flower plucking hand. Her 5 fingers smashed out. With the support of the Red Lotus Overlord fire, the power of the flower-plucking hand increased by more than several times. A flame-shaped claw shot out. No matter how many layers of bamboo defenses Zhu Sheng laid out, they were still easily penetrated. This made her expression more and more ugly, and the sense of crisis was extremely strong. This scene made many elders exclaim and praise in their hearts. Bao was indeed the descendant of that person. Her talent and soul power were simply terrifying. Many elders had participated in the god burial ruins 20 years ago and had also witnessed the fierce battle between Dendi and the battle tower in the god burial valley. The aura of Bao Er's Dao fire was carved from the same mold as Qin Hao's. There was no doubt that Dendi was her biological child. "Junior sister, are you still not going to admit defeat?" Bao Er said in a low voice from high up in the sky. Demonic flames curled around her body, invisibly increasing her domineering aura. "Impossible." Zhu Sheng clenched her teeth tightly. Her forehead was roasted by the scorching Dao insight, causing a layer of sweat to seep out. However, she would absolutely not admit defeat. Her master had high hopes for her in this battle. She wanted to defeat Yun Bao. A ball of light bloomed above Zhu Sheng's palm, condensing into a green staff. Suddenly, the Dao will of life erupted. She swung the staff heavily at the red lotus flower plucking hand. Bang! A ball of flames exploded, and Zhu Sheng retreated a few steps. However, this attack directly scattered the red lotus will of life, successfully restraining Bao Er's attack. The Staff of Longevity. Bao Er looked slightly surprised as she looked at the staff in Zhu Sheng's hand. It was a staff made from the trunk of a strange divine tree, and infused with the Dao will of life of an almighty emperor. This ritual implement's power was extraordinary, and it had a powerful amplification effect. Mother has put in a lot of effort. Isn't she afraid that I'll burn the Staff of Longevity? Bao Er turned to look at the Great Hall. The longevity tree was almost extinct, and the Staff of Longevity in Zhu Sheng's hand was probably the last one left in the world. Mother had given it to Zhu Sheng. How much did she want her to win? However, even with the Staff of Longevity in her hand, Zhu Sheng was still destined to be disappointed by her mother. "Senior sister, I'm going to start beating you up." With the Staff of Longevity in her hand, surges of Dao will of life surged into her body. It was extremely comfortable. Zhu Sheng felt that the Dao will in her body was unprecedentedly strong. She leaped up and reached the same height as Bao Er. She waved the Staff of Longevity in her hand, stirring up the majestic Dili. A boundless green bamboo forest appeared behind her, and the strong bamboo grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a towering divine tree. Even the bamboo leaves glowed with a terrifying sharp light. At this moment, Zhu Sheng's aura was no weaker than Bao Er's. With the boost from the Staff of Longevity, the power of her Dao will even surpassed Bao Er's. Bao Er's talent is too strong. She has perfectly inherited Dendi and Han Er's bloodline. The flames of the way are just one of her abilities. Her spiritual energy is also terrifying. If Zhu Sheng wants to defeat her, she must use force and completely suppress her Dao will. Otherwise, other methods won't work on Bao. In the 100 Spirits Hall, Island Lord Yun Ro stood behind the window on the upper floor of the hall and watched the battle seriously. Now, her aura and figure had become more mature and dignified than 20 years ago. She was the one who raised Bao Er. No one in the world knew her child better than her. Whether it was Dao will or spiritual energy, Bao Er could completely defeat Tharch Yuan of the same realm. The grade of her Dao flame was ridiculously strong. It was like the legendary Red Lotus tyrannical fire. Moreover, Bao Er's imperial body was also very strong. She was born with brute strength that didn't lose to any man who cultivated his body. She could learn learning techniques easily and had almost no weaknesses or blind spot. Therefore, if she wanted to win this battle, she had to work on Zhu Sheng and strengthen her Dao will. Only then could she create obstacles for Bao. Even so, Yun Ro wasn't confident. Bao Er's bloodline didn't seem to be fully awakened. Her potential was limitless. Even if Zhu Xing had the longevity staff of longevity in her hand, this battle was still uncertain. At this moment, in the sky above the training hall, the two of them clashed intensely. The thousands of disciples of the 100 Spirits lineage cheered, and the battle reached a boiling point. With the longevity staff in her hand, Zhu Xing's Tao will of life was greatly strengthened. The more she fought, the fiercer she became. Bao Er also felt a faint pressure and even showed signs of being at a disadvantage. Chapter 1845. Numerous sharp bamboos flew out in a row. Huge bamboo shoots that were as hard as rocks crashed down heavily. Those flying bamboo leaves were even sharper than divine weapons. The space in the sky was completely filled by the bamboo sage's Tao will law, and its power was unleashed to the extreme. Bao Er was in an impenetrable attack, and the waves of attacks pressed down on her. The demonic flames on her body were suppressed, and the flames grew weaker and weaker, as if they were about to be annihilated. Senior sister, you were too stressed last night and did not sleep well. Or did you not eat enough this morning? We've only been fighting for a while, and I haven't even used my full strength yet, and you can't take it anymore? Zhu Xing smiled proudly. The will of life flowed from her hands, and the will in her body surged. It was as if she could see the end of victory. Then you can use your full strength. If your attacks are only at this level, your ending will be very embarrassing. Bao Er resisted the attacks and replied. Shameless boasting. Zhu Xing's expression turned colder as she shouted. The staff of longevity burst with dazzling light, and the will of the Emperor spread forward, turning into endless bamboo shoots that smashed down. The void buzzed loudly, as if thousands of celestial stones were falling, covering everything. At this moment, Bao Er's eyes became demonic. Traces of flame patterns appeared above her eyes as she stared at the attacks that filled the sky. Zhu Xing's will of the way seemed to have trapped her tightly, but in reality, it was not without gaps. At this moment, an incomparably sacred light burst out, and a gorgeous crown appeared on Bao Er's head. Her demonic eyes looked through the layers of attacks and fell on Zhu Xing. They stared at each other, and in an instant, a raging spiritual will of the Emperor descended. Zhu Xing's body trembled, and a divine court appeared in front of her. Above the divine court stood a figure filled with the light of the great path. She was like a majestic and inviolable goddess looking down at Zhu Xing, making her feel inferior. A strong desire to worship arose in her heart, and her spirit was suppressed. In the outside world, Zhu Xing took advantage of the short moment of spiritual suppression and could not control her will. Bao Er's 10,000 spirit fire eyes easily saw through the flaws in her attack. Her body shuttled forward, passing through the dense obstacles. The demonic flames on her palm rolled, and she used the flower-plucking hand again. A flaming claw shot out, bringing with it the sound of the air breaking. It was extremely fierce. Han Er's will of the Emperor. Witnessing this scene, Yun Ro's soul in the 100 Spirits Palace trembled slightly. A wave of sadness swept over her, and 2 streams of tears slowly fell from the corners of her eyes. Danger! Many disciples outside the arena were shocked. Yun Bao was able to counter Zhu Xing, who was wielding the staff of longevity, in the face of such concentrated attacks. She had seized the opportunity to land a heavy blow. Her talent was simply terrifying. Was she preparing to win in one move? At this moment, Zhu Xing's mind was being suppressed by Bao and the will on her body began to weaken. It was as if she had lost her soul, and she stood there in a daze, leaving her wide open. Even the will of the Emperor that she had released earlier had lost control and become extremely chaotic. She was no longer able to stop Bao. The crowd saw Bao and Zhu Xing closing in on each other. Her flaming claw was about to land on Zhu Xing's chest. At this moment, something unexpected happened. A beam of light of the great path suddenly exploded from where Zhu Xing was. A terrifying spiritual wave was born from the light, breaking through Bao Er's suppression and breaking free from the illusion of the divine court. As her consciousness recovered, the majestic will of the way of life was waved from the staff of longevity, and the chaotic rules were restored to order. She did not give Bao Er a chance. With a thought, bamboo shoots fell from the sky. The spinning bamboo leaves turned into a terrifying storm that swallowed up her opponent. Immediately, the rock-like bamboo shoots and the sharp bamboo were all sucked into the storm. The light and fire of the red lotus 100 flower hands were also annihilated. At this moment the arena was silent. The disciples heard the roar and saw Bao Er's entire body trapped in Zhu Xing's will of the way. Everyone's hearts sank. Was this the end? However, the outcome was different from what they had imagined. Although many elders and disciples thought that it would be difficult for Bao Er to win, they had never thought that she would lose. If Zhu Xing had not broken free from the spiritual suppression, the outcome would have been completely different. What was that ball of light that had broken through Bao Er's spiritual suppression? Why did the might of the way that permeated the light give everyone a sense of familiarity? Boom, boom, boom. The deafening sound gradually stopped. Bao Er, who had completely endured Zhu Xing's will of the way of life, appeared in front of everyone in the next moment. The flames on her body had dissipated, and she was in a sorry state. Her clothes were torn in many places, and there were many bruises on her body. There were also small wounds caused by the bamboo leaf. However, her aura did not weaken. She crossed her arms over her face and stood steadily in front of Zhu Xing. "She's fine." Zhu Xing's beautiful eyes widened. Her expression was extremely shocked, and her facial features slowly squeezed together. Senior sister's physical strength was too ridiculous, wasn't it? Soul-suppressing orb. Bao Er slowly lowered her arms that were covering her face. She stared at the orb floating in front of Zhu Xing. Zhu Xing was shocked, and so was she. This orb was as clear as water and contained an extremely majestic will of the way of life. It was the natal orb formed by the Crimson Pearl disciples of the Fifth Island. Among the 9 veins of the phoenix flower, the Fifth Island specialized in spiritual suppression. Every disciple who entered the Fifth Island was proficient in this way. Moreover, the island master and the elders taught them all the emperor techniques related to spiritual suppression. Bao Er never expected Zhu Xing to have a soul-suppressing orb. Of course, Zhu Xing could not have learned the emperor techniques of the Fifth Island, and the soul-suppressing orb was not hers. Otherwise, she could have activated the orb just now and caused even more severe injuries to Bao Er. All of this must be her mother's doing behind the scenes. Bao Er glanced at the main hall. In order to let Zhu Xing win, not only did she give her the longevity staff, she even went to the Fifth Island to borrow a soul-suppressing orb. Was she doing this to prevent Zhu Xing from suffering from her spiritual suppression? Mother had gone through a lot of trouble. It's the Crimson Pearl Island's soul-suppressing orb. This. The elders and disciples outside the arena were also shocked. They all had an incredulous expression. No wonder Zhu Xing had exploded with powerful spiritual fluctuations. It was the soul-suppressing orb that destroyed Bao Er's emperor intent. It was not Zhu Xing herself. At this moment, Li Lufeng looked at the first elder with a hint of anger. Previously, his master had said that the island master had set a rule that did not allow Bao Er to use the other 8 veins of emperor technique. However, in the blink of an eye, he had lent Zhu Xing the soul-suppressing orb of the Fifth Island. He went back on his words and revealed it at the most critical moment. Not only did she injure Bao Er, but Bao Er would have been defeated by Zhu Xing if not for her powerful emperor body. It was unfair. It was simply infuriating. Where did senior sister learn the body refinement technique? Junior sister is so envious. However, this is not a big problem. You have been hit by several of my laws. Do you still have the ability to fight? Zhu Xing looked at Bao Er and smiled. Admit defeat. It's more dignified. Bao Er was already injured, and Zhu Xing's laws and Tao intent remained in her body. Zhu Xing held the longevity staff in her hand and had the soul-suppressing orb to protect her emperor's soul. She was in an invincible position. Yun Bao had exhausted all her technique. It was meaningless to continue fighting. I have never cultivated any body refinement technique. You can be envious because I was born like this. As for admitting defeat? Bao Er's voice changed. Her pure and bright eyes suddenly became deep like an endless abyss. It gave people a sense of suffocation. Boom! A layer of flames burst out from her body and soared up. The blood-red flames broke through the 9 heavens and illuminated the 100-spirit Tao peak. Bao Er's brows were filled with anger. The bloodline power in her body roared. An even stronger power burst out. The flames that enveloped her body gradually turned from red to black. What followed was an even more terrifying emperor aura and suffocating pressure. The flames were as red as ink. This is... Yun Ro's eyes widened. Bao Er's Tao flame had transformed for the second time. It seemed to have mutated. The power that burst out made her heart palpitate. Could it be her innate bloodline had awakened? The reason why a powerful family's descendants were stronger than ordinary martial artists was because their ancestors had an unparalleled almighty. Those almighty's methods were extraordinary. They could imprint their own Tao intent and the laws they were good at into their bloodline or even their bones. From then on, it would be passed down from generation to generation, allowing the family to continue their power. When the next generation was born, they would have an innate advantage. Bao Er was in such a situation. Dendi and Xiao Han's bloodline flowed in her body. She might not have inherited every ability, but most of the talents were imprinted in her bloodline. Under special circumstances, it was very likely that they would be awakened. Yun Ro felt that the intensity of Bao Er's Tao flame had far surpassed before. This was not in her plan. She had temporarily broken the restraints she had set for Bao Er. In fact, Yun Ro's guess was right. The flames on Bao Er's body gradually turned from red to black. It was indeed a kind of talent. Qin Hao's burning law. Through the burning law, it allowed the red lotus to sublimate a second time. Its power and Tao intent were greatly enhanced. Even Bao Er's temperament became more demonic, giving people a deep sense of oppression. What's going on? Zhu Xing held the longevity staff in her hand. A powerful life Tao intent gathered in her body. Even so, she panicked when she saw Yun Bao Er's current state. Her senior sister's aura was rising. As the black flames lingered, her aura continued to increase. It was getting more and more terrifying. Zhu Xing suddenly had the illusion that she was facing a Tao emperor. Junior sister, Mother is too good to you. I'm very jealous. Bao Er's pitch-black eyes were as deep as the abyss. Her voice was so cold that it made Zhu Xing have an impulse to run away. Unfortunately, there was no chance to escape. Bao Er slowly stretched out her hand. Endless light fell from the sky and bathed her body. Black flames bathed the holy petals. She looked like a demon, but also like a celestial being. The extreme scene was shocking to the eyes. Buzz. There was a terrifying vibration in the air. The flower fairy art was activated. The 100-spirit flower picking hand broke through the air. There was nothing fancy about it. With the support of the burning law, the Red Lotus Overlord fire merged with the 100-spirit sect's strongest martial technique. The Tao intent that Bao Er burst forth was beyond everyone's imagination. Master, save me. Zhu Xing's face was as pale as paper. She let out a cry in a different tone. Her body trembled violently, and she could not move at all. She was imprisoned by Bao Er's emperor intent. The pressure on her body was no different from a Tao emperor. She was a 6th-stage Tao emperor. Even with the help of the longevity staff, it was impossible for her to win against a Tao emperor. There were 4 Tao emperor rings between them. She even lost the ability to escape in front of a Tao emperor. As for the soul-suppressing pearl, it was a borrowed broken pearl. It was useless. Now that Bao wanted to defeat Zhu Xing, she did not want to use spiritual attacks. Chapter 1846. The black flame was as black as ink, like a great furnace that could refine everything. The remaining rules on Bao Er's body were all refined in it. Bao Er's palm struck forward without any fancy moves. The flower-plucking hand whistled through the air. The power of the Tao was so shocking that even the great elder, who was hosting the competition, changed his expression. Tears of panic appeared in Zhu Xing's eyes. It was as if she was suppressed by a sovereign master and could not move. She had no choice but to call for help. The atmosphere was extremely suffocating. However, no one stopped her. Yun Ro and the other elders did not intervene. When the Tao of Emperor came, the flower-plucking hand's violent energy hit her face. Zhu Xing closed her eyes tightly. Her neck shrunk subconsciously, and her body and spirit were tense. Buzz. The Tao power of this palm finally dissipated. Bao dispersed dilly. There was no need for them to continue fighting because the outcome was already decided. She was scared to tears. Junior sister's tear-stained face was really pitiful. A gentle palm patted Zhu Xing's little head. For some reason, Bao stood in front of her and smiled at Zhu Xing. Zhu Xing's tense spirit relaxed. The power that crushed her spirit disappeared. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Bao Er's chest. However, this palm did not carry any dilly. Even so, Bao would not give her any chance to touch her. The jade hand on Zhu Xing's head gently pressed down. A body fell like a meteor. With a buzz, it smashed into the ground of the training hall and shook up a layer of smoke. Ouch, it hurts. Zhu Xing fell and squatted. She got up and patted her butt. She looked up at Bao angrily. She looked very unconvinced and said, "Your power is one level higher than mine. It's unfair." Bao shook her head and said, "Okay, you have to stand at attention. You have to admit that you lost. I only used half of my strength. I took care of you very well." "You..." Zhu Xing pouted and looked like she was about to cry. "You don't have to humiliate me like this. Half of your strength is comparable to a sovereign master. Who are you trying to scare? Believe it or not." Bao looked at the great elder. "Don't just stand there. Get to work." "Oh, the first seat of the 100 Spirits clan, Yun Bao." The great elder announced the result of the competition. "Ha ha ha, senior sister, you are too powerful. You gave us all a fright just now. We thought we were going to capsize." Senior sister Zhu Xing is also very powerful. With 2 large weapons in hand, he had to give senior sister Zhu Xing some face. Many mischievous junior sisters rushed into the training hall and surrounded Bao and Zhu Xing, chattering non-stop. Bao was indeed worthy of being the island master's beloved daughter. Her position as the chief disciple was extremely stable. Li Lufeng also went up to congratulate him. The power that Bao had displayed was extremely shocking. Just now, Bao's aura was almost on par with a Tao-proving monarch. This battle had given Li Lufeng great confidence. Perhaps the 100 Spirits lineage could really snatch the dream branch from Ba Dao. The elders looked at the atmosphere in the training ground and revealed gratified smiles. The outcome of the battle between Bao and Zhu Xing was within their expectations. But the course of the battle was beyond everyone's expectations. The island master had bestowed upon Zhu Xing 2 magic tools to protect her. Even so, she had still been defeated. Bao's talent was far too terrifying. Perhaps this year's Mengji really might descend upon 100 Spirits Island. But it was only a possibility. Phoenix Flower, the leader of the 9 lineages, and Bailan, the second-ranked island, were all above Zhu Xing in terms of strength. Bao's chances of snatching the dream branch were slim. Even if there was only a 1% chance, with Bao around, the 100 Spirits lineage would have the qualifications to compete. 20 years had passed, and the child had grown up. Bauer was 32 years old this year, and would be considered an old lady in an ordinary family. However, in the cultivation world, especially in front of the Tao of Emperors, a mere 20 years was like the blink of an eye. If that woman was still alive and had witnessed Bauer's growth, she would be so happy. The figures in the training hall gradually dispersed. Today's battle had shocked the elders and disciples of the 100 Spirits lineage. Although there were some twists and turns, it did not affect Bauer's victory. "Mother." As the elders and disciples dispersed, Bauer shouted towards the majestic hall above. Her eager eyes scanned carefully as if she wanted to catch the figure she had been hoping for. But in the end, she did not see Yunro. Bauer's fingers gradually tightened. The training hall was empty, and she was the only one left. She stood there and waited for a long time, but she did not receive a response from Yunro. With disappointment in her heart, she lowered her head and left. Although she had won the battle, she was not happy. This feeling was too unbearable. "Little girl, Mother also hopes that you can live a stable and happy life, but your birth is destined to be unstable. Don't blame Mother for being heartless. I only hope that one day, when even I can't protect you, our little princess of the 100 Spirits lineage will be able to take charge and protect herself. Am I right?" "Little Han." Yunro silently muttered a name. She stood in a corner of the hall where Bauer could not see and silently watched her back. Her heart ached, but she had to endure it. This was also cruel to her. She did not want the tragedy from 20 years ago to repeat itself on Bauer. Hence, Bauer had to be strong enough. She had to be stronger than Denda back then. 1 month later. In the north border of the East Continent, an incomparably grand event swept through the north border and spread to the entire East Continent until the news reached every overlord's faction. The 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect, the 9 Islands Martial Arts Symposium, established a goddess who would inherit the 9 branches' supreme Dharch artifact, the Dream Branch. After the news spread, the north border was in an uproar, and the 5 territories were shocked. The Phoenix Flower Sect was very influential. Their disciples were all over the 3,000 small world. Even among the overlords of the East Continent, many of them were from the Phoenix Flower Sect. Now, the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect had established a goddess who would inherit the Dream Branch. This was equivalent to announcing that the goddess that was about to be born in the East Continent would become the future leader of the Phoenix Flower Sect. With the Phoenix Flower Goddess's command, the 9 islands had to obey. With the 9 islands' immense power, not just in the North Domain, even in the entire Divine Wilderness, the Phoenix Flower Goddess would become an extremely influential figure. No one would dare to underestimate her, including the Sunset Battle God and Great Qin's Empress Ling Xian. On this day, the 9 branches Martial Arts Symposium began. The location was set to be the first of the 9 islands, the Phoenix Flower Mountain. The Phoenix Flower Tao Peak was the supreme ancestral ground of the 9 branches. The island master of each branch had walked out from this place, and then established a new orthodoxy to take in disciples. For thousands of years, most of the northern territory was governed by the 9 branches, and they were extremely powerful. Now, the 9 branches had established a goddess to inherit the Dream Branch. The overlords of the 5 territories naturally had to send people to observe the ceremony to show their respect. At this moment, the Phoenix Flower Mountain was filled with people. The atmosphere of the mountain was very lively. No matter which branch the Phoenix Flower Sect was, they were all women. Usually, men were not allowed to go up the mountain. Therefore, many overlords came to take advantage of this grand event. Even if the scenery was not good, the 9 branches fairies were gathered here. It was a beautiful scene that could not be missed, especially when the 3rd Island Lord, Yunro, would come personally. Yunro's name was very famous in the East Continent. In terms of prestige and cultivation, she was not as good as the Empress of the East Continent, Han Lingxian. However, in terms of temperament and beauty, The lords of the 5 territories had to admit that they would fall in love with her. No one could remain unmoved when they saw Yun-Ro. It was a pity that they could only look at her from afar. They were not fated to be with her. From then on, they hoped to meet her in their dreams.